Welcome to The One She Damned, a vampire dark fantasy, where fate is complicated, the connection is undeniable, and some bonds are written in blood long before we ever meet. There's snark, steam, and a mate bond neither of them asked for, but can't escape. Buckle up, Coven. From haunted hearts to ancient curses, you'll find stories here that pull you in and don't let go. If you're into tales that twist the real and the unreal, you're in the right place. Nyxen Audiobooks. Hit that subscribe button and let's dive in. The moon rose fat and red above the city, a gorged, hungry eye watching from the heavens. It bled its light across the skeletal cathedral spires and the broken, huddling rooftops of a place that had once felt like home, a sprawling dominion of shadows and whispers where their kind moved unseen. Now, it was just another graveyard waiting to be filled, a sprawling, indifferent tomb, suffocating beneath the electric glow of 1,000 human inventions. Valentina stood at the edge of the bell tower, the wind pressing cold, insistent fingers through the delicate lace sleeves of her gown, a chilling echo of the constant gnaw in her ancient stomach. Below her, the city pulse cars like frantic, crimson blood cells in the asphalt veins, humans moving about, oblivious, each a fleeting vessel of the very life they craved. 1,000,000 beating hearts, and none of them hers to claim, not in the way they once were. The suffocating hunger of her coven was a palpable thing, a low, resonant thrum beneath the city's hum, a collective agony that radiated up to her, tightening the invisible chains around her own throat. Hers was a hunger that had once been an aristocratic choice, a glorious indulgence, a ballet of predator and prey under the vast, uncaring stars. Now, it was a dull, constant ache, a humiliation. Lysander appeared beside her without sound. As always, more wraith than man, a phantom woven from shadow and unwavering loyalty. His silver hair was bound meticulously at the nape, his coat immaculate, his eyes wolfish, ancient, and dangerous held a mirror to her unspoken suffering. He was a silent echo of the collective despair. They found nothing, he said, his voice like velvet wrapped around a blade, a grim pronouncement that confirmed her worst fears. The hospitals are locked down tighter than a Vatican vault. Security cameras on every block, facial recognition programs, DNA databases. They've made hunting a digital hazard, a sterile, inescapable cage. Valentina didn't respond right away. Her silence was not born of indifference, but of a calculating, deadly patience. She traced one long-nailed finger, perfectly manicured, despite the deep-seated weariness she fought, across the cold, pitted stone railing, where centuries of time and rain had worn it smooth. The cold, clinical efficiency of the mortal world, with its glowing screens and invisible tendrils of surveillance, was a far more formidable foe than any witch hunter or holy crusade. This new world pulsed with an oppressive, stifling energy, closing in, day by day, inch by agonizing inch. "So we starve," she murmured, her voice a silken thread, barely a whisper against the wind, yet ringing with an ancient authority that Lysander instinctively bowed to. There was no question in her tone, only a cold, hard fact. "Is that your summary, Lysander? That the children of the night are reduced to shadows, slowly fading?" "No, my queen," he said, lowering his head, a gesture of absolute fealty, but also a silent acknowledgement of the dire straits they faced. "I summarize that we adapt or perish." A flicker of emotion, too quick to name, too deep to fully register, crossed Valentina's impossibly beautiful face. Was it a shadow of ancient rage, a ghost of regal pride, or simply the barest hint of the profound frustration gnawing at her? "Perish," she echoed, tasting the word, letting its bitter truth coat her tongue. "We've survived plagues, inquisitions, world wars, crusades that sought our very eradication. But a smartphone may be our undoing. A single digital image, a stray strand of hair, and an immortal predator become mere data, trapped in the cold, clinical glow of a screen. The thought of their ancient, noble lineage being tracked by glowing pixels, of their sacred blood being reduced to a bag in a sterile bank, fueled the subtle, barely perceptible tremor that ran through her. Lysander remained silent, a sentinel carved from the night waiting for her command, for the direction she would inevitably provide. She could feel his hunger, his frustration, a dull ache that resonated with hers. She turned from the ledge, her soft heels clicking across the cracked stone, each step a precise, measured beat against the relentless march of time. Her dress, a cascade of black silk, followed like a shadow stitched to her soul, eternal and severe, yet beneath it, she felt the subtle, ragged edges of an immortal soul fraying under an unbearable weight. "I had a dream," she said, her voice now carrying a different cadence, a resonance that hinted at prophecy. "A vision, a city in flames, blood flooding the streets, not from our usual discreet endeavors, but from chaos unleashed. And at the center of it all, a man with smoke in his eyes and sin in his smile. Immortal, yet a king of a different kind of darkness." Lysander stiffened, a silent intake of breath. He knew the dream, the whispers. "Alessandro Torino," she said, drawing the name from some sacred, accursed text, each syllable weighted with a grim necessity. "The shadow of the five families. A man with connections no one speaks of and power that doesn't match his paltry bloodline. He traffics in secrets and sin, in the very vices that keep this modern world spinning like a diseased top." "Mortal filth," Lysander hissed, the contempt evident in his tone. The thought of their queen, their revered leader, even considering such a thing was anathema. "You would consort with him? With one of them?" Valentina smiled, and it was not a kind thing, nor one meant to reassure. It was the predator's smile, cold and sharp. "He feeds from the world, as we do, but he does it in plain sight, with tailored suits and bulletproof glass, and no fear of a surveillance camera. That kind of predator understands necessity. He understands the cost of power, and he is willing to pay it in the currency of mortal corruption." Lysander stepped closer, his voice low, urgent, a final protest against the unthinkable. "You cannot trust him. He is a serpent, a betrayer." "I don't intend to trust him," Valentina corrected, her gaze unwavering, fixed on the distant glow of the city's neon heart. "I intend to make him need me. I will thread my ancient despair through his mortal ambition, and together we will carve a new path through this suffocating age." A pause hung heavy in the air, broken only by the city's distant hum. Then, reluctantly, knowing the futility of further argument against her cold, calculating resolve, Lysander nodded. "I will make inquiries." Quietly, Valentina looked toward the city again, the blood moon now a crown over her cold, elegant beauty, a macabre halo for her desperate resolve. "No," she said, the single word a command delivered with the weight of centuries. "I will go to him myself." Lysander's face turned to stone, true horror etched into his ancient features. "You would enter the den of criminals without your guard? Alone?" "My queen, it is madness!" "I will enter his world alone," Valentina reiterated, her voice like steel cloaked in silk, "because a queen does not beg through messengers. She makes the earth tremble in her presence. And if this world is indeed a new battlefield, then I shall fight it on its new terms, with new weapons." A sudden gust of wind curled around her as she stepped past him, a spectral whisper of the power she held, even as she bent to this new, humiliating purpose. She descended the spiral stairs with the fluid grace of a centuries-old specter, her silhouette swallowed by the dimness below. Her voice echoed after him like a whispered benediction, or perhaps a chilling curse upon their very survival. "If we are to survive this new world, my loyal Lysander, we must embrace its monsters. We must become them, in ways we never imagined possible. And in the city below, in a club that pulsed with the synthetic heartbeat of vice and illicit desire, Alessandro Torino poured a glass of wine the color of spilled blood. He turned toward the darkness, a hungry smile playing on his lips, unaware that the ancient, suffocating hunger had just set its calculating, desperate eyes upon him. Erebus wasn't a club. It was a confession booth soaked in sin and neon, a cathedral built from consequences and financed by whispered deals. Its very architecture spoke of curated power. Polished black granite floors gleamed under the fractured halos of bespoke chandeliers, reflecting the dizzying dance of laser lights and the blurred faces of 1,000 supplicants. The air itself was a heavy, intoxicating blend of perfumes and stale cologne, expensive cigar smoke, and the faint, metallic tang of an unspoken threat. This was Alessandro Torino's domain, a concrete monument to his untouchable empire, where luxury wasn't just aesthetic, it was a statement, a warning. The music pulsed through the bones of the building, deep bass thuds like muffled gunshots under velvet beats, a rhythm that resonated not just in the chest, but in the very marrow. Alessandro moved through this curated chaos like a ghost, a shadow among shadows, yet every head turned, every conversation hushed as he passed. He wasn't seen so much as felt, a sudden drop in temperature, a tightening of the air. Women, draped in silks and predatory smiles, watched him with an unsettling blend of desire and fear, seeing in his dark, unreadable eyes both danger and a perverse, irresistible deliverance. They knew who he was, the quiet architect of futures, the silent reaper of pasts. He didn't descend to the frenetic dance floor, nor did he drink from the well of chaos he owned. Instead, he observed, eyes like ink in judgment, from a private balcony that curved like a predator's grin above the sprawling revelry. A cigarette burned between two fingers, its smoke curling lazily, a slow funeral pyre for any lingering innocence. He was a still point in a turning world, a silent, all-encompassing presence. A woman, tall and impossibly elegant, with a cascade of platinum hair and lips like grenadine, detached herself from a cluster of admirers and drifted towards him. Her breath, rich with perfume and expensive champagne, ghosted against his ear. "Mr. Torino," she purred, her voice a seductive rasp, "you never come down to the dance floor. Makes a girl feel unwanted." Alessandro didn't stir. He flicked ash over the gilded edge of the railing, watching it drift into the dizzying lights below, never once glancing at her. "Don't take this the wrong way." He looked her dead in the eyes. "But I'm not interested. I don't want you. And I don't want to have this conversation again." It landed the way his words always did, quiet, clean, and fatal, like a blade between ribs. No mess, just damage. Her perfectly painted smile faltered, a stark flicker of vulnerability crossing her striking features before she blinked, gathered her composure, and vanished back into the anonymity of the crowd, her brief, bold attempt extinguished by his casual disdain. He had tasted every flavor of sin this world offered, every indulgence, every fleeting pleasure, and found it all bland, leaving only the bitter aftertaste of emptiness. Gio, his longtime consigliere, stepped up behind him, gray at the temples, but still sharper than a scalpel dipped in ice, a lifetime of loyalty and grim efficiency etched into his face. "Subtle, boss," Gio murmured, a wry twist to his lips. "Remind me to print that on a Valentine's Day card." Alessandro didn't smile. Not fully. His amusement, a rare, fleeting thing, showed only in the quiet flex of his jaw, in the almost imperceptible hum of satisfaction beneath his stillness. "What's the word?" he asked, his gaze still sweeping the anonymous faces below. "Shipment hit the docks clean. No eyes, no heat. And our friends in blue are still playing fetch with the toys we gave them." "Good." He tapped Ash again, the glow illuminating the hard line of his jaw. "And the Russians? Busy shooting each other." "We might have nudged that a little." Gio smirked. A genuine, if grim, amusement. "You're the only man I know who can light a match and convince two others they struck it." Alessandro finally turned, stepping back into the darker, more private interior of the balcony suite. The air here was thicker, saturated with the faint, persistent scent of gun oil and cigar smoke that had seeped into the black leather and polished mahogany walls like old ghosts. His footsteps were soundless on the plush carpet. He paused before a painting on the wall, Caravaggio's Judith beheading Holofernes, the original, stolen, quietly, from a private collection. The irony wasn't lost on him. He recognized himself in both the grim resolve of Judith and the brutal, inevitable fate of Holofernes. "Everyone bleeds," he said, his voice a low, reflective murmur. "Poetic," Gio offered, ever the pragmatist. "Are you working on a book?" "Just the last chapter of a few lives." He poured himself a drink whiskey, neat, from a crystal decanter that shimmered with an inner fire, costing more than most cars. As he lifted it, The music below shifted, drastically, softer. A slow, ethereal rhythm threaded with distant, melancholic violins, a melody out of time and place. It was profoundly beautiful and profoundly unsettling. His gaze, which had been distant, sharpened, sweeping the crowd again. Nothing unusual, no one knew, but still, the air felt different, thinner, colder. A prickle of unease traced its way along his spine, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. Gio frowned beside him. You hear that? Yeah, that wasn't on the playlist. I approved all tonight's sets myself. Alessandro didn't answer. He moved back to the reinforced glass, gaze sweeping the floor, not searching for someone, but for meaning, a spark, a fault line. There was none. Just quiet pressure and something old, slipping through the cracks. Just a ripple, like a single dark drop of ink in clear water, spreading, tainting everything. The kind of subtle, fundamental wrong that a man like him didn't ignore. He finished the drink in a slow, deliberate swallow, the burn a welcome anchor to reality, and set the crystal glass down with a muted clink. Have our guys check the exits, he commanded, his voice now a low, dangerous hum. Everyone coming in, everyone going out. I want eyes on every screen, every camera feed. Look for anything, no matter how small. Are you expecting trouble? Gio asked, his hand instinctively drifting to the tailored pocket where his concealed weapon lay. No. Alessandro's voice lowered to a near whisper, his gaze fixed on the endless, glittering city sprawling beyond Erebus's walls. There, in the depths of his reflection, was the profound weight of his solitude, the unspoken ache of a man who owned everything but felt nothing, who commanded armies but stood utterly alone. But something's changing. Gio nodded, already moving, his silhouette blending instantly into the deeper shadows of the suite's entrance. Alessandro stayed behind, one hand on the cool glass, the city lights reflecting at him like a two-faced god, both glittering promise and desolate void. And somewhere beyond Erebus's walls, beneath the weight of a red-soaked moon, something ancient began to stir, a discordant note in the carefully orchestrated symphony of his power. The music didn't just dip into something sultry. It melted, all slow, aching strings and dark scents that whispered of forbidden pleasures, like smoke curling into a kiss, promising a delicious burn. The crowd didn't notice the shift, not consciously, but they moved differently now, slower, heavier. The very air had thickened, imbued with an unseen perfume that clung to the skin, while the pervasive blue and violet lighting of Erebus seemed to dim imperceptibly, casting longer, more dramatic shadows. Time itself felt stretched, drawing thin around the edges, as if the room tilted by degrees toward something unseen, something inevitable. Alessandro felt it before he saw her, that ripple again. Not fear, no, never fear, but presence, a profound and unsettling otherness. Like the moment right before a loaded gun goes off, you don't hear the shot, you feel the air tighten around it, the world holding its breath. He stood at the balcony, untouched by the chaos below, his glass half full of amber liquid, his imported cigarette forgotten, burning down slowly and unloved in the crystal ashtray, a silent testament to a sudden, potent distraction. Then the crowd parted. Not dramatically. No lightning flash, no trumpet blast, just moved. Like the deep sea giving way to something that didn't walk so much as glide. Heads turned, slowly, almost reluctantly, eyes widening, then quickly looking away, as if their minds struggled with what their instincts already knew. Conversations tapered into hushed murmurs, then silence, drinks forgotten mid-lift, laughter dying on lips, a collective, wordless deference. And there she was. She stepped into the world of Erebus like she'd been here before, like the place had been built for her and simply forgotten until now. Her beauty was architectural elegant, ancient, and intimidating. She wore black. Not the ordinary black of cocktail dresses and funeral suits, but black that drank the light, that seemed to move even when she stood still, an almost ethereal void. A high collar, stiff yet graceful, brushed the delicate line of her jaw, and long sleeves clung to her arms like whispering shadows. The fabric itself shimmered faintly, like oil on still water, beautiful, dangerous, untouchable. Her hair was dark as old ink, cascading in soft waves down her back, not a strand out of place, each curl a testament to an impossible perfection. Her skin pale, not porcelain, but something older, something luminous, like candlelight on marble, moonlight in a crypt. And her eyes, God help him, her eyes were galaxies, not just cold, ancient, as if she'd seen the world end once already and had opinions about it. She wasn't beautiful the way models were beautiful. She was beautiful the way a cathedral is terrifying in its silence, holy in its structure, and full of secrets that bled slowly, eternally. Alessandro's jaw flexed. His hand tightened around the glass, the knuckles going white. This wasn't lust or even simple attraction. It was a primal recognition, like the earth shifting beneath a king's throne. A dangerous, exhilarating current of suspicion mixed with a reverence he hadn't known he possessed. This felt less like a chance encounter and more like a pivotal point the universe had been arcing towards. Gio returned at that exact moment, glanced down at the floor, and stopped short, his usually boisterous demeanor deflating. "Boss, I see her," Alessandro murmured, his gaze never leaving the woman. "Who the hell is that?" Gio whispered, clearly unnerved. "No idea." He didn't move. Couldn't. It wasn't fear. Alessandro Torino wasn't afraid of anything with a pulse, and he certainly wasn't afraid of a woman, no matter how striking. But this felt like a test. A gauntlet thrown down by fate itself. A terrible, beautiful certainty began to bloom in his chest, one he violently denied even as it took root. She was not just here, she was here for him. She moved through the club like time moved through history, slow, purposeful, unbothered by the sudden palpable weight of everyone's attention. People turned to look and then looked away just as fast, like their bodies knew better than their minds did. She didn't glance at the DJ. She didn't speak to the bartender. She didn't pause for anyone. But when she reached the center of the floor, beneath the massive chandelier, shaped like a bleeding rose, she lifted her gaze and looked straight at him. Alessandro Torino, the man who made lesser devils flinch, the storm made flesh, felt the world narrow to a pinprick. Their eyes locked across the swirling, hushed expanse of the club. 1 second. 2, 3. Long enough for something old to shift inside his ribcage, for a silent challenge to be issued and accepted. Not a glance, but an inquisition, a claim. A question asked, an answer given without a whisper of sound. In that prolonged gaze, she peeled back layers he didn't even know he possessed, finding the dark, quiet places where his true nature resided. He didn't nod. She didn't smile. Just that steady, ancient stare that promised either damnation or salvation, perhaps both. And then she turned and walked toward the velvet staircase leading up to the balcony. The bouncers, normally unyielding sentinels, didn't stop her. They didn't dare. They stood frozen, their eyes wide, watching her ascent with a mixture of awe and inexplicable fear. Gio stared at Alessandro, a little pale now, his earlier composure utterly shattered. "Should I do something?" "Yeah," Alessandro said, stepping back and straightening the lapels of his jacket, his movements precise, controlled. From the outside, he was composed, outwardly serene. Inside, the first fissure of something irreparable had begun. "Get the hell out of my way." He lit another cigarette with fingers that were steadier than they should have been. The smoke curled around him, a veil against the sudden clarity of the moment. "She's coming to me," he said softly, mostly to himself. The words, a dangerous, almost triumphant whisper. "And that doesn't bother you?" Gio asked, a genuine tremor in his voice. "It bothers me a lot." He smiled then, slow and sharp, a predator's grin, the kind of smile that promised a beautiful, agonizing hunt. "But I've always liked trouble that dresses well. The dead don't dream, but the old ones remember." Valentina's memory was a cathedral gold and blood and silence, the air heavy with incense and secrets. And in the farthest pew, always kneeling, was the girl she used to be. 1473, Florence. The city smelled of marble dust, wine, and lies, but beneath it all, the faint metallic tang of ambition and spilled blood. Valentina della Scala had been born not just to silk sheets, but to the suffocating weight of expectation and sharpened smiles. She was a daughter of nobility, her lineage as exquisite and brittle as Venetian glass. Promised like cattle in a transaction of fortunes, gifted like fine porcelain to cement an alliance. Every aspect of her beauty was meticulously curated. Her skin kept pale as moonlight with rose water and careful avoidance of the sun, her voice trained to soothe and flatter, her thoughts kept silent behind an unreadable facade. But her heart, that foolish, rebellious thing, had wandered, a wild bird escaping its gilded cage. She fell for the stable boy, of course. Not a duke, not a prince, but a boy whose hands bore the honest calluses of labor, whose eyes held a spark of genuine mischief, and whose crooked grin promised laughter instead of obligation. He smelled of horses and sun-warmed earth, a stark contrast to the cloying perfumes and stale incense of her life. He kissed her like he didn't care who she was, just hearing she let him, surrendering to the audacious, intoxicating freedom of his touch. 3 weeks of stolen heat, of breathless whispers behind chapel walls draped in shadows, of hurried caresses amidst the fragrant roses and manicured hedges of garden gates. Then came the blood. They hung him from the highest balcony outside her window, a cruel, public spectacle. The rope bit deep into his young neck, and his body swayed gently in the morning breeze, a grotesque pendulum against the pale sky. They didn't even take the time to clean the stone beneath, leaving a dark, spreading stain that mirrored the one on her soul. The next day, before the stain had faded, she was married off to a merchant with gold teeth and eyes as dead as the coins he hoarded. His touch was clammy, his breath stale. That night, as moonlight, cold and pale as judgment, painted the room, outlining the heavy brocade drapes and the carved oak of the bridal bed, he kissed her wrist tenderly. The velvet touch of his lips was a prelude to the icy kiss of steel. He slit her throat with a blade etched in Latin, a dark, archaic script that promised eternity. "You'll be beautiful forever," he whispered, his voice a low hum within the sudden, ringing silence of the room as her life spilled out onto the silken sheets. She woke, entombed in cold marble, the air thick with the scent of stagnant water and dust. Her gown, once pristine white, was stiff with her own dried blood, clinging like a second skin. Her mouth was full of an insatiable hunger and the metallic, bitter taste of betrayal that lingered like a curse. She spent decades learning how to breathe again without needing to, how to walk without attracting notice, a ghost among the living. She learned how to feed not with mercy, but with an exquisite, refined taste that elevated the act from necessity to art. Lysander found her in Rome just after the sack, when the stench of burning flesh and despair still hung heavy in the air. She was bathing in the blood of a fallen soldier, cleansing herself of the city's sins and her growing monstrousness, when he offered her a hand and a name. His voice was ancient velvet, his eyes piercing and knowing. "We are not monsters," he had said, his words a balm on her raw, bleeding spirit. "We are memories." She believed him, for a time. But belief was always temporary, a fragile construct. Hunger wasn't. Centuries blurred. Kingdoms fell like dominoes. Men emperors and artists, generals and philosophers came and went, screaming her name in lust or terror, or dying with it on their lips. She built her coven quietly, beneath monasteries steeped in ancient prayers, within forgotten courtyards cloaked by ivy, and amongst the hushed grandeur of art museums. She watched the world change, brick by bloody brick, adapting with the slow, patient grace of a predator. But no matter how much civilization evolved, it never forgave a woman for surviving, for taking what was hers. So she didn't ask for forgiveness. She just learned to smile again, a carefully honed expression of serene power, and when necessary, bare her teeth while doing it, revealing the ancient, predatory beauty lurking beneath the polished surface. This past, this tapestry of silk and blood, love and betrayal, was not merely a memory. It was the very fabric of her being, a suit tailored in the fires of suffering that she could never shed. Elsewhere, another life, another hunger. Alessandro Torino's childhood didn't end. It was stolen violently and shot in the grimy alley behind his father's butcher shop. The smell of fresh blood, rain-slicked concrete, and the lingering scent of stale cigarette smoke became the indelible perfume of his youth. They called it an accident. The police shrugged, the neighbors averted their eyes, but he remembered the men, hulking shadows in the downpour, the chilling silence that fell over the street when they left, the way no one, not the crying shopkeepers, not the indifferent officers, looked him in the eye after. By 11, he was doing collections, small sums, cold dread. By 15, he'd figured out the family business wasn't meat, it was silence. And silence, he learned, had a price, usually paid in fear or pain. His uncle, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, taught him how to smile without showing teeth, how to listen more than he spoke, and how to observe the subtle shifts in a man's posture that betrayed weakness. His mother, a woman worn thin by silence and sleepless nights, stepped in front of traffic one gray morning, not out of madness, but exhaustion, a life too heavy, and no one left to carry it with her. At 16, with his father gone and his mother a memory, Alessandro chose who lived and who didn't, based not on morality, but math. He calculated risks, weighed assets, and balanced the ledger of loyalty and betrayal. Loyalty, he understood, was not a virtue, but a commodity to be bought, sold, or brutally enforced. Trust was a weakness, a vulnerability he could exploit in others but never afford himself. And pain was currency, a universal language he learned to speak fluently with chilling precision. He learned to make people fear him before they knew his name, a phantom dread that preceded his arrival. He learned to dress well, in suits tailored to perfection, to speak softly, his voice a low, unassuming rumble that commanded attention, and to never tell the truth twice, weaving an intricate web of misdirection. By 28, he was a king in a suit without a crown, ruling a sprawling empire of whispers and ledgers soaked in red ink, his power absolute, his control meticulous. He'd built his throne from the very concrete of that alley, from the blood of his father, from his mother's silent despair, but somewhere deep beneath the money, the vintage wine, the whispered confessions of desperate men, and the cold calculation she was still that boy. Watching his father bleed out in the rain, the raw, unmourned grief, a festering wound beneath his polished exterior, and though he would never say it, never admit to such a vulnerability, that boy never stopped being hungry. Not for food, not for affection, but for control, for absolute dominance, for a world where no one could ever steal from him again. His past was his shadow, a suit of hardened resolve, perfectly fitted, eternally present, and utterly impossible to take off. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her like the final, damning note in a requiem, sealing the office in a silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Alessandro stayed precisely where he was, a statue of guarded power behind his sprawling mahogany desk. One hand rested lightly on the polished edge, the knuckles white beneath tanned skin. The other held a cigarette, forgotten, its cherry, a glowing ember that had burned half an inch without him noticing. A thin ribbon of smoke spiraled upwards, a phantom extension of his coiled tension. Valentina crossed the room as if it were an extension of her own will, her private chamber. No hesitation, no apology for the sudden intrusion. The whisper of her boot heels over the marble floor was a sound like secrets shared only with the stone. The sophisticated overhead lighting, designed to flatter and illuminate, seemed to shy away from her, casting her in a perpetual play of shade and soft relief, as if it understood instinctively who deserved a spotlight and who merely demanded the shadows to bend to their presence. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. Her very existence in his space was a declaration. Alessandro exhaled slowly, a plume of smoke curling between them, a tangible dare in the still air. "You made quite an entrance," he said, his voice low, smooth as aged whiskey, betraying nothing but a practiced calm. "I almost offered you the club." "You'd be surprised what I've been offered," she replied, the words a cool current, devoid of amusement or ego. She settled into the supple black leather chair across from him, but did not lounge. She perched, perfectly upright, perfectly still, like a queen taking her throne at court. Or perhaps a blade waiting to be drawn, its edge poised. Alessandro dropped into his chair with a deliberate, almost theatrical casualness, a calculated movement designed to project an ease that masked the razor-sharp tension humming beneath his skin. He let the silence stretch, allowing it to press in around them like warm, suffocating velvet, testing her patience, her resolve. It was a game he usually won. She broke it, her voice cutting through the thick quiet with an unexpected directness. "You don't know who I am." It was not a question, not an opening for introduction, but a calm observation, a statement of fact that hung in the air, weighted with implications. He smiled then, the corner of his mouth tilting with practiced menace, a flash of white teeth against swarthy skin. "Not yet, but you're not here for the music." His eyes, dark and sharp, never left hers, searching for any tremor, any tell. No. Her single syllable was as self-contained as a perfectly cut gem. "And not for the drinks." "Certainly not." "Then that leaves business, unless this is a confession." His gaze was a physical weight, daring her to flinch. Valentina's lips curved just slightly. Not a smile, not truly. More a suggestion of a ripple across the surface of a perfectly still pond. "What do you think I need to confess, Mr. Torino?" "That's what I'm waiting to find out." He reached for the crystal decanter between them, its facets catching the dim light, and poured himself a measure of amber liquid. He didn't offer her one. Something primal, an instinct honed by years of living on the edge of savagery, told him she didn't drink anything he served, didn't consume anything, she didn't choose herself. Still, he sipped, slowly, deliberately, his eyes locked on her the entire time. The scent of fine aged liquor mingled with the lingering smoke, a heady, dangerous cocktail. "You didn't come through my men, you didn't call, you didn't ask permission, you just walked in," he observed, his voice still low, but with an underlying current of steel. It wasn't an accusation, but an appraisal, a subtle probe. Would it have made a difference if I had? Her question was rhetorical, dismissive. Maybe, but I respect a good power play. He took another slow sip, letting the words hang between them, a silent acknowledgement of her audacious entrance. "Then you'll like what I'm here to offer." That caught him. He leaned back, glass still in hand, his expression sliding into something utterly unreadable. His gaze remained fixed on her, a predator assessing an unfamiliar, highly dangerous prey. "Is that right?" "I have a problem," she said, her voice dropping a fraction, becoming even more intimate, more chillingly direct. "And I think you're the kind of man who trades in solutions. You think I'm a problem solver?" A hint of dark amusement flickered in his eyes. "I think you're a king with a city full of pawns, and I'm offering you a new kind of peace." He didn't answer right away. His instincts were pulling in wildly opposite directions. Everything about her felt wrong, too smooth, too practiced, too calm in a world that demanded a constant edge. But God, she was interesting, fascinating, a dangerous, forbidden fruit. "And what kind of peace are we talking about?" Valentina leaned forward now, barely a movement, a subtle shift of weight. But it was enough to draw the eye, enough to subtly shift the gravity in the opulent room. A faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted off her, not perfume, but something ancient cool like stone and wild, night-blooming jasmine. "I have people. Not ordinary people." "You don't say." His voice was dry, but his internal alarm bells were beginning to ring with a peculiar, thrilling rhythm. "They don't get caught. They don't hesitate. They don't miss. And they are loyal to me and me alone." Her gaze held his, unwavering, daring him to doubt. Alessandro narrowed his eyes, the casual confidence he'd worn moments before beginning to fray at the edges. "Assassins?" "Something like that." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle, to sink into the heavy air between them. Then she said it, as if offering him the mundane weather forecast for tomorrow. "They're vampires." The word didn't echo. It didn't land with drama or a deafening shockwave. It just sat there, quietly rearranging the very air in the room, rewriting the rules of his world. For a fraction of a second, the silence was absolute. Alessandro sipped his drink again, a gesture of almost supernatural calm, steady. No flicker of disbelief, no widening of the eyes. This wasn't his first encounter with the impossible, just the most elegant. He exhaled, slow and steady. Classified, I'm sure, he murmured, a low rumble in his chest. You don't move like anyone waiting on permission. A soft sound escaped her lips. Not a laugh, not quite, but a breath of air that held a fleeting hint of something akin to amusement. You're taking this well. I've seen too much not to believe in the unexplainable, he countered, his voice a low hum. And you make the unexplainable look expensive. He set the glass down, a soft clink against the polished wood. The game had just escalated, and he found a strange, dark thrill in it. All right, so you have vampires and a problem. My coven is starving, she stated, the stark reality of it delivered without a hint of emotion. Hunting is harder. Now technology, cameras, medical records. You'd be amazed how difficult it is to feed quietly these days. I need a clean, renewable food supply. And you came to me. The implication hung heavy. He trafficked in human lives, but this was a consumption. Your human trafficking routes. Your brothels, your holding houses. You already moved the untraceable. I'm not asking you to provide corpses, just donors, alive, discreet, and off the grid. Her eyes, once pools of cool indifference, now held a faint, sharp glint, like chips of obsidian. Voluntary? The word was a test, a probe into her true nature. Voluntary. Enough. The slight pause, the emphasis on the last word, was more damning than any confession. It was a declaration of power and a disdain for human rights. And, in exchange, he leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his hands clasped, fingers interlaced. The posture was deceptively relaxed. She sat back again, her posture returning to that perfect, poised stillness. You get my protection, my people. We make enemies disappear without a trace. No bullets, no forensics, no bodies. Her words were silken, yet each one implied an absolute, terrifying finality. How many? He asked, seeing the scope, the chilling efficiency of the proposition. Enough. You turn any of them? He watched her face closely for any tell, any flicker of deception. No, I don't share power. They feed. They don't convert. Not without my permission. Another silence stretched between them, thick with unspeakable implications. Alessandro's fingers tapped once on the glass, a soft, almost imperceptible sound in the quiet room, then stopped. This wasn't just a deal. It was a pact, a fusion of two dark empires, one ancient and one modern. It was a test of who would bleed first, who would break under the unspoken weight of the other's will. I want exclusivity. You work only with me. He laid down his first term, a line in the sand. Naturally, her tone was smooth, unruffled, as if this were merely a formality. I choose who you touch. You don't feed from my crew. His declaration was absolute. He might trade in pawns, but his kings and queens were untouchable. Agreed. He leaned back, studying her, a slow, predatory appraisal in his dark eyes. A dangerous admiration flickered within him. You are a queen, aren't you? Of a dying court, she corrected, her gaze unwavering, acknowledging a vulnerability he hadn't yet grasped. And you're trusting me not to exploit you? He probed, trying to find the crack in her perfect composure. No. She stood then, that same slow, deliberate movement that spoke of ancient patience and absolute control. The air in the room seemed to cool, to thin. I'm trusting you to see the value and power you don't have to explain. She turned toward the door again, gliding rather than walking, but paused just before her hand touched the handle. Her back was to him, her posture regal, unyielding. If you say yes, we begin tomorrow. If you say no, then forget you ever met me, and pray you never do again. The last words were a silken thread of threat, woven into the very fabric of the air. She opened the door. The low thrum of the club's bass, muted by the thick walls, barely registered. Alessandro's voice, velvet and smoke, followed her. I'll call you. His last attempt to assert dominance, to dictate the terms of their next interaction. No, Mr. Torino, she said without looking back, her voice a cool final note. I'll call you. Then she was gone, and the heavy door clicked shut once more, leaving Alessandro Torino alone in his office, the scent of her ancient power and his burning cigarette hanging heavy in the air. The requiem had ended, and the overture to something far more dangerous had just begun. The warehouse on the river was one of Alessandro's quieter properties. No signs, no cameras, no questions. Just a long stretch of concrete and silence, wrapped in shadows and humidity. The air, though warm, felt scrubbed clean, the polished concrete floor underfoot almost gleaming under the harsh industrial lights, a deliberate, almost surgical sterility that somehow intensified the raw, animal tension humming beneath. Every echo of footsteps seemed amplified, clinical, and precise. The deal had been inked 2 nights ago in a room full of unspoken rules. Tonight, they sealed it the old-fashioned way. Blood. Alessandro stood near the loading dock in a tailored 3-piece, sleeves rolled, collar loose. His posture was deceptively relaxed, but the muscles in his jaw were tight. The air smelled like oil, old rope, and the sharp metallic tang of anticipation. He had a cigarette between his fingers, unlit, half forgotten, a small, still point in a storm he'd orchestrated. A few feet away, Gio shifted uneasily, his heavy frame restless. I don't like this, he muttered, his voice a low rumble. It's not clean, not like we're used to. Around them, the other men, hardened, practical men of violence, seemed to mirror Gio's discomfort, their gazes darting towards the center of the room. Nothing about this is clean, Alessandro said, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. That's why it works. In the stark center of the room, under the single industrial light, stood a young man, Leo. He was shirtless, his skin pale, veins visible beneath the surface like faint blue rivers. His pulse fluttered beneath his neck like a trapped thing, a frantic drum in the oppressive silence. Leo volunteered, Alessandro said aloud, his voice cutting through the tension. Loud enough for the gathered crew to hear, because loyalty isn't a word we just say around here. Leo looked pale, nervous, brave enough to be terrified, his eyes wide and unfocused. And then she entered. Valentina. No announcement, no warning. Just a sudden, absolute awareness that something other was in the room now, a shift in the very fabric of the sterile air. She wore black again, this time a looser, flowing fabric that seemed to absorb the light, making her more shadow than woman. Her eyes, unnervingly still and ancient, scanned the faces of the men with the detached amusement of a queen inspecting soldiers. Some looked away, their gazes skittering. One crossed himself, a desperate, old-world gesture. Another swallowed loudly and didn't realize it, the sound startlingly loud in the silence. She walked up to Leo with slow, quiet steps, her movements fluid, almost languid. There was no hurry, no performance, only a predatory grace. You've done well, she said softly, her voice a low murmur like silk and smoke, wrapping around him an insidious comfort. I'm ready, Leo whispered, though his hands trembled uncontrollably at his sides, betraying the fragile courage in his voice. She smiled. It was small, a mere upturn of the lips that didn't reach her eyes. And then, just like that, her eyes changed. They deepened, darkened to pools of obsidian, her pupils swallowing the meager light around them, and her fangs elegant, impossibly white, descended with a soft sound, like a silk ribbon pulled tight, a faint, almost inaudible click in the hush. She stepped behind him, her body pressing lightly against his back. He shivered violently, a full-body tremor, and she bit. For the first 3 seconds, there was only a profound, suffocating silence, punctuated only by the ragged breaths of the watching men. Then Leo gasped, a choked, wet sound. His legs buckled slightly, his hands clenched into fists, fingernails digging into his palms. Alessandro watched, his face unreadable, a perfect mask of control. Valentina looked straight at him the whole time, her eyes luminous, challenging, a silent communication passing between them that no one else could decipher. Gio, however, turned away sharply, his face contorted in disgust, and then something changed. Leo convulsed, a violent, full-body spasm that racked his frame. His breathing hitched, a sharp, choked intake, then stopped. A collective gasp rippled through the crew. "Shit!" Gio barked, his voice raw, and he stepped forward, hand already moving to draw his weapon. Several other men shifted, a nervous energy turning to outright alarm. Valentina, however, remained utterly unperturbed. She held Leo in place with one arm across his chest, the other calmly withdrawing. Her fangs slid back behind her lips with the same soft click. A thin line of crimson, stark against her paleness, traced her bottom lip. She licked it away with a delicate, deliberate motion. "He's fine," she said, her voice completely level, devoid of any rush or concern. Leo slumped to the ground, eyes rolled back, lips parted in a vacant gasp. He looked utterly, chillingly lifeless. "He doesn't look fine!" Gio snapped, his face flushed with fury and fear. "You said it wouldn't go that far." Alessandro stepped forward, his gaze dissecting Leo's still form, then snapping back to Valentina. "Valentina," he said, his voice low, controlled, a dangerous hum beneath the surface. "You said it wouldn't kill him." She turned toward him slowly, her movements unhurried, almost lazy. Her expression remained unreadable, utterly devoid of emotion. Not smug, not cold, just still. A profound, unnerving stillness that defied the chaos she'd just created. It didn't. She knelt without a hint of urgency and placed two slender fingers on Leo's neck. Then she looked up at Alessandro, her gaze calm, certain. Pulse is strong. He's in shock. Happens sometimes the first time adrenaline, endorphins, fear. He'll wake in 10 minutes. Her voice was soft, conversational, as if explaining a minor inconvenience. Gio looked ready to spit blood, his hand still hovering near his jacket. "You expect us to keep doing this if this is what it looks like?" Valentina stood, rising with an effortless grace that seemed to suck all the noise from the room, and the room went still. Her gaze, dark and penetrating, swept across the faces of every man present, every eye, every frozen breath. And the room quieted, the tension thickening to a palpable silence without her raising a single note of volume. Then she smiled. It was slow, sinful, a smile that promised both pleasure and ruin. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice low and warm like wine at midnight, yet carrying an undeniable command that resonated deep in their bones. "You deal in flesh, in fear, in guns, drugs, and graves, and you flinch at a little fainting spell?" No one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken shame and dawning realization. He's alive. He'll recover. He may even ask to do it again. She walked past Gio as if he were smoke, as if his furious presence was less than nothing. "Some of them enjoy it, the surrender, the intimacy. It's not like your world, but it's not so far either." Her words hung in the air, chilling and seductive. Alessandro said nothing for a long moment, simply observing, processing. His men were terrified, yes, but also utterly captivated, their fear battling with a primal fascination. He felt it too, that strange magnetic pull. He knelt beside Leo, checked the pulse himself. Steady, strong, alive. The young man's chest rose and fell with a shallow, regular rhythm. Alessandro stood, a subtle shift in his posture, and nodded once, a gesture of quiet affirmation. "We'll continue." Gio opened his mouth, then shut it, seeing the resolute determination in Alessandro's eyes. Valentina turned her gaze fully to Alessandro's, dark, gleaming with ancient knowledge. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice a silken promise. "You've brought death into your empire, Mr. Torino." A faint, knowing smile played on Alessandro's lips. He finally lit the cigarette, the flare briefly illuminating his eyes, which held a newfound, dangerous spark. He drew a slow, deliberate drag of smoke, exhaling it lazily into the sterile air. "I already had death," he replied, his voice a low counterpoint to hers, utterly calm and certain. He was in far deeper than he'd ever planned, stepping into a world he barely understood, a realm of power and shadow that defied all his known rules. And yet, somehow, as Valentina's unnerving calm enveloped the tense silence, he knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was exactly where he belonged. You just made it pretty. The first month of the alliance was nothing short of biblical. Not in chaos and control. Everything ran smoother, sharper, deadlier. Alessandro's empire didn't expand. It tightened, like a silk glove pulling tight over a closed fist. Rivals stopped speaking his name in rooms with windows. Even the city itself seemed to lean in when he walked by. But it wasn't him they feared. Not really. It was them, the ones who worked for him now but didn't breathe, the ones no one saw enter or leave, who left behind nothing but the silence of a job done too well. They had names, faces, but those were formalities. The vampires moved through the city like myths with tailored instructions. They didn't shoot, they didn't threaten, they didn't negotiate. They simply arrived, did what needed doing, and disappeared, leaving only confusion, horror, and absolute silence in their wake. A high-value snitch, dead in his penthouse, no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no cause of death, just the frozen look of a man who'd seen something no one would ever believe. The subtle, ancient grace of the vampiric touch left no bruising, no mark, only a mind flayed by a terror beyond mortal comprehension before the whisper of death claimed them. A cartel runner? Found on a private yacht drifting outside the harbor. Not a mark on him. Heart stopped. All electronics were wiped. Every other passenger unharmed but terrified unable to describe what happened. Only a shared, chilling memory of a sudden, pervasive cold and a silent, gliding shadow. No blood, no mess, just clean, perfect erasure. Lysander's operatives worked in coordinated person to mesmerize, one to finish. They needed no weapons, they used shadows and charm. They handled disposal themselves, leaving not a trace of their passage. There were rules, protocols. Valentina insisted on it. They weren't savages, they were professionals. A rival CEO who had defied Alessandro for years abruptly resigned, citing unforeseen personal reasons. His board members, though, spoke of a shared, inexplicable dread that had settled upon their last meeting, a coldness that seeped into their bones, making them agree to anything just to make it stop. No overt threats, no violence, just an insidious shift in the atmosphere that left them utterly broken in spirit. A corrupt judge found in his chambers, not dead, but catatonic, muttering about eyes that saw too much, forever trapped in a waking nightmare, a silent, living warning to others. And Alessandro, who'd built his kingdom on deals and death, now sat at the head of something so efficient, it frightened even him. He never questioned Valentina's authority over them, but he studied it. How she spoke, and they obeyed. How a flick of her fingers could unmake a man's fate. She didn't control them through power Alonesh, controlled them through loyalty. The kind that couldn't be bought, only earned. And that fascinated him. In return, she got discretion, access. Every transport route, every tunnel, every burned-off ledger Alessandro's empire had built to move the untraceable now belonged to her. She didn't ask questions about where the bodies came from. He didn't ask questions about what she did with them afterward. It was trust, in the most dangerous form, mutual benefit. But not everyone was convinced. Lysander watched from the edges like a soldier, stationed at the border of something sacred. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. His lips thinned a fraction whenever a report of a perfectly executed disappearance landed on his desk. A muscle in his jaw would tick, a silent protest against the unnatural precision of it all. He saw the way Alessandro looked at Valentina now. Not like a partner, not like a deal maker. Like a man looking into a locked vault and wondering if he could break it open without losing a hand. Lysander's words, once direct with Alessandro, became clipped, pragmatic, devoid of the usual easy camaraderie. He subtly steered his operatives away from any tasks that required vampiric intervention, preferring the messy, predictable violence of humans to the chilling efficiency of the undead. He saw Valentina shift, too. Her eyes lingered longer, her voice softened in places it hadn't before. She was still the queen, but now she was amused, and that was dangerous. They met in private, Lysander and Valentina, atop a high-rise soaked in rain and city light. She stood at the edge, dress clinging in the breeze, watching headlights smear across wet streets like blood from an open vein. "He's playing a long game," Lysander said, his voice flat, devoid of his usual warmth. "So am I. You don't see it, do you? You're softening, letting him in. I'm letting him close. That's not the same thing." "It always starts that way," he countered, his gaze unwavering, betraying the subtle, quiet refusal of his entire being to accept this new normal. She turned, slowly. "You think I'm in danger?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "I think you're starting to want to be." That silenced her. Not because it hurt, but because it rang too close to something she hadn't wanted to name. She looked back toward the city. "He understands hunger, Lysander. Not just the kind that drains blood. He understands power. That doesn't mean he deserves yours." She didn't reply, because part of her didn't know anymore. Back in his office, Alessandro reviewed a dossier man with too many enemies and too many secrets. He circled the name, passed it to one of Valentina's people. "Clean, no splash," he said, with a hint of a smile, a subtle arrogance entering his posture as he considered the effortless power now at his command. The vampire, tall, pale, composed, nodded once. No questions, no unnecessary movement, and vanished into the dark, leaving no trace but a faint, lingering chill. Alessandro leaned back in his chair, staring at the spot the man had been. "I could get used to this," he muttered, his fascination with Valentina and her world utterly eclipsing any burgeoning unease. Lysander's subtle warnings, if he even registered them, were dismissed as the archaic concerns of a man clinging to an outdated era of brutality. But part of him already knew. Nothing this perfect stays clean forever. The polish gleamed, but beneath it, the first faint cracks were already spiderwebbing across the unholy alliance. The room was an antechamber to Alessandro Torino's obsession, a realm where shadows clung to stacks of forbidden knowledge. Dust motes danced in the anemic glow of the desk lamp, illuminating not just books but brittle maps, yellowed scrolls, and sheafs of handwritten notes, culled from private collections and whispered archives. He wasn't seeking fairy tales. He was charting a new, terrifying cartography of power. His fingers, usually so precise with a ledger or a firearm, now traced the elegant script of forgotten tongues. Creatore Nocturne. Blood rituals and immortal lineages lay open, its pages smelling of grave earth and forgotten incantations. Beside it, a 17th century engraving depicted a city ravaged not by war, but by something far more primordial. Another text, a rare Jesuit account uncovered through a network of shadowy antiquarians, detailed the blight of nocturnal hunger in rural Sicily, cross-referenced with local folklore and meticulous astronomical charts. He pored over them with the cold precision of a surgeon, his mind sifting through the dross of superstition for the gold of quantifiable truth. He believed in control, in systems, in the unyielding logic of cause and effect. Yet, as the hours bled into dawn, Valentina, the woman, began to recede, replaced by an intricate tapestry of ancient curses, whispered pacts, and the inexorable pull of a bloodline that defied the known laws of physics. She was no longer a person to be conquered, but a myth to be unraveled, a dangerous equation whose variables he was determined to solve. Every forgotten treaty, every cryptic symbol, every unnatural death recorded in these crumbling texts became a piece of the puzzle, leading him deeper into a world he had long dismissed as the fanciful delusions of the weak. "Jesus," Gio muttered from the doorway, watching him. "You're going all in on the spooky shit, huh?" Alessandro didn't look up. Knowledge is leverage. So's a shotgun. A shotgun can't stop something that doesn't die. That shut Gio up, but only for a moment. "You're not falling for her, are you?" "I don't fall." "Right. You just obsess elegantly." Alessandro gave him a look that ended the conversation. Gio left, Muttering about garlic and silver bullets, Alessandro returned to the page. There were mentions of bloodline spear and turned, coven hierarchies, feeding methods, old treaties between the undead and the mortal elite, all of it shrouded in myth, but the kind of myth that read like a contract written in bone. He wasn't just studying Valentina, he was studying her world, trying to find the thread that made her real, reachable, mortal. He wanted to understand the rules, so he could learn how to break them. Meanwhile, the city began to whisper, not the usual low hum of deals and threats, but a sibilant hiss of fear, an unease that spread through the underworld like cold smoke creeping under closed doors. The other families, entrenched in centuries of brutal, predictable violence, listened. The Romano crew's ill-fated shipment wasn't just lost, it was erased. Men vanished mid-transport, their radio silence a chilling final soundscape. No wreckage, no oil slick, no ransom note, just an empty stretch of ocean and the lingering scent of something acrid on the salt air. The Baldassar twins, enforcers whose reputation preceded them like a storm front, weren't merely found dead in a hotel suite. They were pale, almost translucent, as if the very life had been drawn from them, leaving only the scent of Capera metallic tang that clung to the air like a curse and a shattered rosary clutched in one brother's hand, beads scattered like broken teeth. It was too clean, too fast, too unnatural, and the invisible thread of suspicion, thin as a spider silk but strong as dread, led inexorably back to Alessandro Torino. He wasn't louder. He wasn't flashier. He was simply untouchable now. His influence, once rooted in strategic alliances and brutal efficiency, now felt like something else entirely, something ancient and hungry. No one trusted power they couldn't understand, and Torino's new edge felt less like human ambition and more like the shadow of a predator unseen. The whispers grew louder. A guard dog found dismembered without a struggle, a rival's consigliere found paralyzed, eyes wide with incomprehensible terror, a single bite mark on his throat. The old ways were failing, and they knew chilling calculus was at play. One night, as the city slept fitfully beneath a bruised sky, Valentina found Alessandro, alone, in the private study below Erebus. The air, usually thick with the scent of old paper and ambition, was softened by the low, melancholic croon of Billie Holiday, dripping from the speakers like slow, dark wine. He didn't stand when she entered. He rarely did anymore. His focus, relentless and impenetrable, was on the open volume before him, its yellowed pages filled with diagrams of celestial alignments and obscure symbols. "You're researching me," she said, her voice a low current in the quiet room. Not a question, but an observation. "I like to know who I'm in bed with," Alessandro replied, his gaze still fixed on the texted treatise on ancient Slavic folklore, unexpectedly brutal in its descriptions. She moved like smoke around him, fingers brushing the spine of a worn book. "Knowing what I am won't get you what you want." Her eyes met his glacial and glittering. "It only proves you're afraid to ask for it." She moved closer, her eyes scanning the formidable stack of books beside him. Titles in Greek, German, even Sanskrit, their bindings worn, their knowledge arcane. "Those won't help," she murmured, a hint of something unreadability, amusement, regret in her tone. "Perhaps not with the how," he conceded, finally looking up, his eyes sharp, unblinking. "But they illuminate the when. They tell me this isn't the first time your kind got in bed with men like me." "And how did those stories end?" she challenged, her voice devoid of inflection. "Usually with fire," he stated, a stark, unsentimental truth. A beat of silence stretched between them, thick with untold histories. Valentina stepped closer, the soft rustle of her dress, the only sound apart from Holiday's mournful song. "And still you read?" "Still I read." She studied him, the relentless focus in his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw, the veins prominent on his hands where his sleeves were rolled precisely past his elbows. He didn't fear her, not in the simple mortal sense. He was trying to unravel her, to dissect the very essence of her being, to find the thread of humanity, or perhaps the flaw in her immortality. And that, she knew, was infinitely more dangerous than fear. Be careful, Alessandro, she said softly, her voice a warning carried on the somber notes. Curiosity draws blood. So does loyalty, he replied, his gaze unwavering, betraying no emotion. But you already know that. He didn't smile. He just locked eyes with her, and something passed between them, not warmth, not trust, not even animosity. Something primal and hungrier, a silent acknowledgement of predator and prey, of secrets and power. She left without another word, melting back into the shadows of the mansion. And behind her, Alessandro Torino, undeterred, turned the page. Another ritual, another story, another secret to unlock. In a lavish, overly ornate cigar lounge across town, 5 men sat hunched around a polished mahogany table, their faces etched with not just whiskey, but a profound, chilling paranoia. The air, thick with expensive smoke, felt heavy with unspoken dread. He's not using soldiers, muttered Lorenzo Peroni, his usual bravado replaced by a tremor in his voice. Not like us, agreed Carlo Rossi, running a nervous hand over his slick-back hair. These things, they don't make noise. They don't leave a mess. Just an absence. They're not normal, Giuseppe Moretti whispered, the simple statement laced with an existential terror that transcended mere business rivalry. No one who works for Torino is normal anymore, Rossi added, leaning in as if the walls themselves had ears. The collective gaze of the table fixed on the old man in the corner, Dom Romano, patriarch of the Romano family. He sat immobile, a pristine white suit, a stark contrast to the darkness gathering in the room, his heavy gold rings catching the dim light. His hands, usually expressive, were unnervingly still, clasped around a glass of amber liquid. His eyes, though, were alive with a cold, terrifying calculation. If Torino's dealing in the unnatural, Romano's voice rumbled, low and dangerous, then we stop playing human. A hushed gasp passed through the group. You want war, Dom? Peroni asked, almost incredulous. No. Romano took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving the table. I don't want war. War's messy. War's predictable. I want insurance. What kind of insurance? Carlo asked, his throat suddenly dry. The old man's gaze, heavy with 1,000 sins and a lifetime of ruthless decisions, drifted toward the stained glass above the bar. A crucifix, brilliantly rendered, caught the light just right, its vibrant colors reflecting in the old man's unblinking eyes. The kind, Dom Romano articulated, each word a cold, hard stone, that bleeds back. The kind that reminds a creature of the night that dawn always comes, and sometimes it brings its own monsters. A shiver, colder than any winter wind, ran through the room. The unspoken threat, the unthinkable alliance, had just been forged. The underworld was about to descend into a darkness far deeper than mere criminal enterprise, pulling the veil back on ancient fears long thought banished to the realm of myth. Marco stormed into the office like a man kicking open a coffin he was never meant to find. The door slammed against the wall, rattling the framed certificates on the mahogany paneling. A moment later, Alessandro looked up from his desk calm, composed, cigarette dangling from his lips, exhaling a plume of smoke that seemed to mock the fury radiating from his underboss and brother. You're going to explain, Marco snapped, voice low and sharp, straining with a held-back roar. Right now. Alessandro took a slow drag, the cherry of the cigarette glowing like a malevolent eye. He exhaled smoke in a lazy spiral, watching it dissipate into the expensive air. Careful, Marco, he said, his tone smooth as polished stone. You're entering with more heat than sense. Marco didn't flinch. He slammed a thick manila folder on the desk. Photos spilled out like a scattering of bloody secret surveillance stills, grainy but undeniable. Body bags that never got zipped, footage frame grabbed from backdoor cameras showing shadowy figures moving too fast, too unnaturally, feeding. One image, chillingly clear, showed a pair of eyes that gleamed silver in the dark, inhumanly bright. Alessandro stared at them without blinking, his expression unreadable. Where did you get this? Alessandro's voice was softer now, dangerously quiet. I've got guys who ask questions. Marco sneered, his gaze cutting into his brother. You've got creatures who don't leave fingerprints or bodies. He gestured to the grotesque tableau on the desk. I thought it was just rumors. I thought maybe it was superstition, street whispers from broken men. But it's real, isn't it? Alessandro didn't nod. He didn't have to. The silence in the room screamed the truth. Marco shoved the desk with a guttural grunt, sending the cigarette case skittering. What the fuck, Sandro? Vampires? You made a deal with blood-sucking corpses and didn't think to tell me? Your own brother? The man who built this empire with you? Brick? By goddamn brick? His voice cracked with a betrayal deeper than professional slight. It was the raw wound of abandonment. I made a deal with a queen, Alessandro said, his voice like silk over a blade. And her people have done more for this family in a month than your entire crew has in a year? They solved problems you didn't even know existed, Marco. Problems you couldn't solve. He laid out the words like a calculated insult. You're out of your goddamn mind. Marco's jaw was clenched so tight, fine tremors ran through it. You're playing games with things that don't play by our rules. I'm in control. No, you're not. Marco took a step back, pointing toward the door, as if the entire city beyond it was tainted. You let them in. You invited them into our home, our territory. You think that ends with favors. You think they're going to stay tame, stay contained. You think you can put a leash on ancient evil? I'm not afraid of them. Alessandro's eyes, usually cool and calculating, held a spark of something almost defiant, almost zealous. You should be, Marco growled. More than that, you should be afraid of what they're doing to you. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It was the silence of a friendship shattering, a brotherhood eroding under unseen pressure. Alessandro stood, slowly, deliberately. He walked around the desk, stopping just close enough to Marco that the air between them hummed with volatile energy. You think I don't know what this looks like? You think I'm being played? You think I've lost myself to a pair of cold hands and a good dress? Marco's face shifted, his fury momentarily eclipsed by a painful, knowing grimace. Just for a moment, the underboss vanished, replaced by the younger brother who had always seen Alessandro's weaknesses, his vulnerabilities. It's her, isn't it? He said, his voice softer, laced with a bitter understanding. Valentina, this, all of it, it's because of her. That stung, not because it wasn't true, but because Alessandro had never allowed himself to voice the depth of that truth, not even to himself. He hadn't dared. She's dangerous, Marco continued, pressing the wound. She's a monster. So am I, Alessandro said quietly, his gaze steady, unwavering, a silent declaration that he was no longer just Marco's brother, no longer merely a man. Then prove it. Marco stepped forward now, closing the last few inches. Brother to brother. No more pretenses. No more lies between them. The air was thick with the ghost of their childhood, their joint rise to power, the thousand shared secrets and sacrifices. Cut her off. Walk away from this. We go back to the way things were, Sandro. You and me. No monsters, just men. Just us. Handling our business the way we always have. His voice was a desperate plea, a raw attempt to pull back the beautiful, tragic canvas of their lives before it was consumed by fire. I don't recognize you anymore. This isn't you. Alessandro looked at him, and for the first time in years, he saw fear in Marco's eyes. Not for himself, not for the family's empire, but a profound, aching fear for him. It was the look of a man watching his beloved brother drown in a dark current, reaching out a hand, knowing it might be swept away too. If you don't, Marco said, his voice hoarse now, laced with a desperation that twisted into a vow, I'll burn it all down. Her people, everything you've built with them. I swear to God. Sandro, I will not watch this family become a feeding trough for some ancient bitch in her coffin club. The words landed like gunshots in a church, echoing with finality, irrevocably severing the last thread between them. Alessandro stared at him, his features hardening, losing the last vestiges of the man Marco remembered. The choice was made in that silent, agonizing moment. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice cold, distant. You'd betray me. No, Marco said, a tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. I'd save you. He turned, leaving the office door slowly swinging open behind him, allowing the normal sounds of the city to bleed back into the room, a stark contrast to the silence of their fractured bond. That night, Valentina sat with Alessandro in the private quarters beneath Erebus, a sanctuary carved from the city's forgotten depths. She poured him a glass of blood-dark wine, swirling the crimson liquid. The light in the room barely touched her, leaving her in an elegant silhouette against the shadows. You're quiet, she said, her voice a low purr. Marco knows. A pause. She didn't move, didn't react, just watched him with eyes that seemed to hold untold centuries. And? He wants me to choose. She sipped slowly, savoring the taste. Will you? If it comes to it, he said, his voice low, steady, a promise forged in the crucible of fraternal war. I will kill my brother before I give you up. Her eyes flicked to his something dark flickering behind them. Not lust, not pride. Warning, a shadow of an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. Be careful, Alessandro, she said, the words a silken caress. Because the day you choose between love and loyalty is the day you stop being human. That loyalty you command, that family bond you cling to, it is the tether that keeps you anchored. Break it, and you may find yourself adrift in a way you never imagined. He didn't answer. He just drank the dark wine, a bitter communion, and outside, somewhere in the cold, indifferent heart of the city, Marco was loading a gun, his face set in a grim mask of righteous, heartbroken fury. The city, a beast of endless sound, had begun to hold its breath. It started subtly, a thinning of the air, a muting of the usual midnight clamor. Streetlights seemed to cast longer, more spectral shadows, and the hum of distant traffic felt muted, as if the very sound waves were wary. It wasn't quiet, it was waiting. The kind of silence that wraps around a room just before something unforgettable happens. A stillness that didn't just mute noise, but rearranged the silence itself, making every creak and whisper feel amplified and ominous. It began with a funeral, not a real Juanino casket, no mourners, just a butchered vampire found in an abandoned tenement on the east side, his body staked, drained, and burned. The desecrated remains, twisted and scorched, spoke of a precise malice, not mere brutality. They weren't supposed to burn, not like that. Not unless someone knew exactly what they were doing, understood the ancient weaknesses and the specific ritualistic applications of their demise. Lysander, usually a bastion of cool calculation, carried the news like a freshly unearthed grave, his hands clenched loosely at his sides, his eyes, usually pools of detached observation, now flickering with a subtle, uncharacteristic unease. This wasn't a turf message, he said, his voice unusually clipped. This was a signature. Valentina remained a study in elegant stillness, her posture unwavering, a stark counterpoint to the subtle tremor in Lysander's composure. Her silhouette was framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the cathedral's upper hall, the city lights below a blurred tapestry that might as well have been a million miles away. She didn't ask who. She didn't have to. Only one kind of creature killed with symbols, with echoes of a brutal, forgotten faith. Hunter, she whispered, the word barely disturbing the rearranged silence of the hall. It was older than it sounded, older than bullets, older than fire, older even than forgiveness. A word that tasted of ash and blood and the absolute unyielding conviction of a sacred mission. 3 days later, Alessandro felt it. Not just heard felt. It was a cold dread that seeped into the very foundations of his empire. A quiet tension in the streets that made the air heavy. The way people walked faster, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The way daylight seemed to recede an hour too early. Shadows deepening and clinging. Doors locking with a sharper, more definitive click. He'd seen it before a hit, before a war between families. But this was colder, cleaner, a shadow that didn't walk the streets but draped them in a new, unnerving quiet. Gio tossed a folder on the desk. Black and white photos. Clean kills. Too clean. Everybody is a cold testament to methodical destruction. A silent declaration. We've had 3 bodies in 5 nights, not ours, hers. Same signature? Alessandro's voice was low, taut. Exactly the same. Gio's face was grim. And no witnesses? Only one, Gio said, and poured himself a drink, the clink of ice unnaturally loud in the hushed office. Now he's in a church downtown, refusing to speak to anyone who isn't carrying a rosary and a flamethrower. Alessandro didn't smile. He reached for one of the photos. The wounds were surgical precise, ritualistic, a silver spike through the sternum, glinting even in the monochrome image. A cross carved into the skin with something blunt and heated, the edges of the incision a horrifying, deliberate burn. Not random. Not rage. This was personal. This was an act of dark sacrament, meticulously performed. Valentina confirmed it that night. She arrived late, dressed in black with no embroidery, no lace. Just clean lines, minimal jewelry, and a silence that felt not like an absence of sound, but a rearrangement of it, as if the very air molecules had paused to listen. She moved like a whisper, her presence a cold draft in the room. Who is he? Alessandro asked, the question a heavy stone in the air. He calls himself the Bishop. She didn't sit, remaining a figure of severe, dangerous elegance. He's one of the old ones, she said, not an age in training. He was a ghost from a heresy, raised by silent legions of a forgotten dogma, taught the rituals, the sigils, the poison mixes, the right Latin to speak when you want a vampire to bleed before she bites. Alessandro stood, walked around the desk. Slowly, his empire, built brick by blood and cunning, felt suddenly fragile. He's here for you. He's here for what I represent. Her eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of something ancient and weary, which is survival. She met his eyes, unblinking. And maybe power that got a little too public. Power that brought the old guard sniffing. Because of me? No. But because I let you in. Because I allowed myself to be seen with you. To bridge 2 worlds that were meant to remain separate. That silence stretched between them again sharp, intimate. A silence pregnant with unspoken truths, with the weight of centuries of blood and betrayal. The slow coil of fate was tightening, undeniably. So now what? He asked, his voice barely a murmur. He won't stop. He doesn't negotiate. He's the kind of man who blesses his bullets and sleeps in holy salt. If you stand between him and me, he'll burn your entire empire to the ground to reach my ashes. And if I don't, then he'll kill me and take what I've built apart brick by bone. He would meticulously dismantle her, not just kill her. Brick by bone, memory by memory. A long pause. So what are you asking me to do? Nothing. Her voice, usually a silken blade, was now a fragile whisper of defiance. She turned, walked toward the door, her back ramrod straight. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Torino. That's not true. It will be easier if you pretend it is. And she was gone, leaving behind only the ghost of her silence. That night, Alessandro stood on the private balcony of his club, watching the crowd writhe below him in slow motion. The throbbing bass of the music, usually a comfort, became the arrhythmic beat of his own trapped heart. He couldn't hear the music. He could only feel it, the war coming. And the decision clawed at the base of his spine. A visceral, agonizing choice that felt like tearing his flesh. He could protect her, throw the full weight of his resources, his underworld connections, his carefully cultivated power against this ancient, implacable threat. But if he did, the families would know. The world would know. He would expose everything he had built, decades of careful, brutal cultivation, for a woman who was not truly his, not truly human. The exposure would be absolute. The delicate balance he'd maintained between the shadows and the light shattered. Or he could let her face it alone, let the hunter finish what centuries had failed to do. Watch as the powerful, dangerous, alluring creature he'd found himself drawn to was systematically hunted down and destroyed. Save his empire. Save himself. The thought brought a taste of ashes, not from fire, but from the slow burn of his inaction, the moral decay of taking the easy path. It felt like the slow, inexorable coil of fate tightening around them all, dragging them toward an inevitable, bloody conclusion. The phone rang at 6 a.m. He answered without speaking, the chill of the receiver a cold confirmation of his dread. On the other end, Lysander's voice, raspy, strained, and devoid of his usual composure. He's here. Where? In the city. He just killed another one. A beat, heavy with unspoken horror. This one fought back. The body was a testament to raw, desperate power, but even that hadn't been enough. She didn't survive. Valentina? The name was a gasp, an accusation. She's hunting him now. Alone. The words hung in the air, a bell tolling imminent conflict. Alessandro didn't hang up. He just stood there, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the static hum on the line. The room didn't spin from fear, but from the violent convergence of duty and desire, the crushing weight of a choice that would define not just his future, but his very soul. It started like any other night. A feeding schedule, clean, quiet, a volunteer selected from the list low profile, properly vetted. The warehouse was set, the protocols followed, or so Lysander thought. What he didn't realize was that the bishop was a master strategist. He had meticulously woven tiny deviations into the familiar routine, turning comfort into a snare. The volunteer, an unassuming clerk named Arthur, had been vetted by Marco himself, a detail Lysander would never question. The scent of disinfectant, usually clinical and sharp, was subtly muted, overlaid with a faint, almost imperceptible floral note that was meant to disarm. The lighting, low as always, cast shadows that were just a fraction deeper, just enough to obscure certain details. Valentina didn't go. She didn't have to. Lysander handled these things now, as he always had. He arrived early, scoped the building. The lighting was low, but the energy felt off too still, an unnatural quiet that only registered as a prickle on his instincts, but nothing screamed wrong, not yet. Then he opened the side room, and everything stopped. No donor, no guards, just a scent. Blood, but not fresh. Old, trapped. A stage scene, subtly designed to lure, laced with iron and something holy. He turned. Too late. A sharp hiss. The crack of silver bolts firing from hidden crevices. And then, darkness. Surgical. Precise. A trap wrapped in the familiar. Back at Erebus, Alessandro leaned against a balcony railing, watching the club pulse beneath him. He hadn't seen Marco in days, which was unusual, even for tension, even for betrayal waiting in the wings. He checked his watch. The feeding was late. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He answered. Mr. Torino, said a voice like gravel soaked in scripture. We have your queen's dog. Alessandro's blood turned to ice. Who is this? Call me Bishop. We're acquainted through sin. The line crackled. He's not dead, Bishop continued. Yet, but he's bleeding. Holy water. Silver chains. The works. You should have heard him scream. A pause. He won't die easily, neither will you. The line went dead. Alessandro didn't move, didn't breathe. Then Gio, he barked. Yeah, boss? Where's Marco? Gio blinked. He said he had to sit down with Romano and the twins. Neutral ground. Said not to wait up. Did you check where? No. Should I have? Yes. You think? I think my brother just sold me out. Valentina felt it before the call came. A crack in the air, like lightning before a storm. She was halfway out the door before Alessandro's car even pulled up outside the cathedral. He met her at the entrance face tight, eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. It's Marco, he said. He made a deal. He gave Lysander to the hunter. For a moment, Valentina just stared. Her lips parted, but no words came. Then, where? Old train yard. South docks. Bishop's using it like a chapel now. Says it's neutral ground. Said you'd come. She nodded once. No fury. No panic. Just that cold, ancient calm she wore like a second skin. We go together, she said. No. Alessandro touched her arm. You go in first. I'll come in loud. That's a distraction. That's a warning. The train yard was silent. Too silent. The rusted tracks gleamed faintly in the moonlight, winding like veins through the dark. Valentina moved like fog glow, fluid, unseen. She could feel Lysander's blood in the air, not just spilled, sanctified. A cruel, brilliant trick. Her gut twisted. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a ritual, a calculated desecration designed to break them. And then she saw him, chained to an old pillar, shirt torn, skin blistered where the silver had sunk in. His eyes locked on hers, a silent plea for understanding, for rescue. "It's a trap," he whispered, his voice raw. "I know." She reached for him, a fleeting, foolish instinct. And that's when the lights snapped on. Spotlights, guns, holy water rigged in glass bombs. And Bishop dressed in black, a rosary wrapped around his knuckles, like brass knuckles dipped in. Judgment stepped forward. "Welcome, Lady of the Night," he said, his voice a gravelly purr that promised pain. "Let's see how much hell bleeds when cornered." A click, a cold, metallic sound that echoed the snapping of her own desperate hope. Behind her, a figure emerged from the shadows. Marco, gun raised. Aimed not at Bishop or his men, but at Alessandro, who had just arrived from the opposite end, stark against the harsh lights. Valentina's breath hitched. The dread she'd felt building in waves now crashed over her, a tsunami of betrayal. Personal, clever. All the pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Marco had vetted the volunteer. Marco had known the routine. Marco had been the snake in their garden. She felt a phantom bite, deep and agonizing. "Drop it, Sandro," Marco called, his voice eerily calm, devoid of the usual brotherly warmth. His eyes, though, burned with a conviction that chilled Valentina to the bone. "I don't want to kill you. You just want me defenseless while they take her?" Alessandro's voice was a low growl, strained with disbelief. "You want me to watch them tear her apart while you stand by?" "I want my brother back," Marco countered, his grip on the gun steady, unwavering. "I want you back, Sandro. Before you drown in blood and silk, before she turns you into another one of her monsters. This is the only way." He paused, a flicker of something that could almost be pity passing over his face, quickly replaced by grim resolve. "I'm saving you from yourself. From her." Alessandro laughed, cold, beautiful, a sound of utter contempt. "I am blood and silk now, little brother. You think you can unmake me?" His eyes locked onto Valentina, a silent promise exchanged between them even as betrayal surrounded them. And then all hell broke loose. The first shot didn't just shatter a stained glass window. It exploded it, sending 1,000 glittering shards of saints and sinners raining down like frozen screams. The gothic scream of fracturing glass mingled with the sharp crack of the second bullet, which took a vampire, mid-pounce, clean through the heart, in a silent, ash-white bloom. The third report, however, didn't come from the fanatic hunters or the ancient, enraged predators. It came from Alessandro Torino. He hit the ground like a man born for violence, not just raised in Ida's tailored coat, flaring like dark wings, a custom-fitted Ruger Jeep 100 already drawn. The look in his eyes no longer merely criminal, but something primal, fiercely protective, blazing with an edge of dangerous desperation. Bishop, his face a mask of zealotry, turned as the bullet cracked past his ear, peppering the stone with concrete dust. "Ah," the hunter said, with a smile as sharp as a freshly honed stake, glinting silver in the dim, chaotic light. "The mortal half of this sin." Alessandro didn't respond, didn't waste a breath. His jaw was set, a muscle ticking in his temple. He just aimed again, a dark, immovable silhouette against the swirling madness, and fired. Chaos didn't just ignite, it erupted. The feeding chamber, a place of ancient ritual and shadowed hunger, exploded into a maelstrom of violence. Silver dust bombs detonated, shimmering like poisoned snow, burning vampire flesh. Smoke billowed, thick and acrid, choking the air. Ultraviolet flashes tore the preternatural darkness apart, searing the eyes of monsters and men alike. Lysander, still chained, muscles bunched in impotent rage, snarled as the light seared his ancient skin, his eyes glowing like embers in a furnace. Then Valentina moved. Not with the frantic energy of a human, but like shadow incarnatia, whisper of silk and impossible speed. Graceful, lethal, teeth bared not in hunger, but in a primal, consuming rage. She was a blur, a dark streak across the pandemonium, reaching Lysander in seconds. Her slender hands, possessing an unnatural strength, went to his chains, snapping the blessed silver links like a brittle string. He collapsed forward, gasping, weakened but unbroken, his gaze meeting hers. A flicker of acknowledgement. He nodded. Go, he rasped, his voice raw, his eyes still burning with the UV sting. I've got the rest. You can barely stand, Valentina hissed, her rage barely contained. So they'll underestimate me, Lysander retorted, a ghost of his ancient cunning in his eyes. Behind them, Alessandro fought like a man with nothing left to lose, a whirlwind of furious survival. He wasn't just shooting, he was defending. Every single bullet, a desperate plea, a desperate shield. His movements were direct, brutal, and efficient. Every step he took was toward her, a bloody, determined advance through the swirling maelstrom of fang and fire. Everybody that fell, whether a human hunter or a ravening vampire, was someone who had gotten too close, someone who had posed a threat to her. He was a mortal breaking himself against an impossible tide, his humanity a beacon of unexpected violence. Valentina moved beside him now, a deadly dance of two disparate forces. Her movements were fluid, effortless, her kills quick and silent. His were grounded, punctuated by the roar of his gun, the satisfying thud of a fist, connecting, the strained twist of muscle and bone. Back to back, they cut a swath through armed zealots and blood-drunk chaos. A strange, terrifying partnership of steel and fang, brute force, and supernatural grace. You're bleeding, she hissed, her eyes flicking to the dark stain blooming on his side as she dragged him behind the dubious cover of an overturned altar. I bled worse, he gasped, pressing a hand to the wound, his breath ragged. He managed a grim, almost feral grin. But thank you for noticing. A gun clicked beside them, a cold, precise sound that cut through the cacophony. Bishop. The hunter's face was grim but triumphant as he raised a gleaming, blessed revolver, its silver barrel catching a stray spark of UV light. This ends tonight, Alessandro Torino. Agreed. Alessandro growled, his voice guttural, his eyes locked on the barrel. Then, with a sudden, desperate lurch born purely of instinct, he threw himself in front of Valentina as Bishop fired. Pain bloomed. Not sharp, not searing, heavy, a dull, suffocating weight in Alessandro's chest, like something vast and cold pulling him under the darkest water. He hit the ground with a deadened thud, the wind knocked from his lungs, the world tilting precariously. The last thing he saw, blurry and close, was Valentina's face, inches from his, her hands on his cheeks, surprisingly gentle even through the shock, and her voice, low and dangerous and trembling with an ancient, terrifying fury he'd never heard before. Don't you dare. When he woke, everything was fire. Not literal flames, but the searing, oppressive heat of the aftermath. The warehouse was a charnel house of ash and ruin, choked with a metallic tang of blood and the bitter scent of ozone. Bodies both kinds, human hunters grotesquely twisted, vampires reduced to piles of dust and discarded funeral, littered the floor like macabre offerings. Smoke coiled lazily from the lingering hot spots, like incense offered to a forgotten god of violence. Valentina sat beside him, cross-legged on the grimy floor. Her dress was torn, exposing a curve of shoulder, her hair wild and disheveled, but her posture was regal, unbent. Her eyes were not golden, but deep pools of obsidian, black with lingering rage, reflecting the dying embers of the battle. She looked like vengeance embodied, a creature of pure, ancient wrath barely reined in. You're lucky, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet laced with an undertone of something fragile and dangerous. The bullet was meant for your heart, a blessed silver round. Missed? He rasped, his voice hoarse, his chest aching with a dull, throbbing pain. You moved, she stated, as if it were an inconvenient fact. Just enough. Did I save you? He asked, a faint, almost defiant smile touching his lips. You distracted him long enough, she corrected, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. But your intent was clear. She leaned down, her cool breath a whisper against his ear. Never do it again, Alessandro. Do you understand me? Never. He smiled then, a genuine, if pained, expression. His ribs protested with a sharp twinge. Worth it. The aftermath was brutal, a reckoning that carved a deep, unforgiving line through Alessandro's empire. His men, his human men, who had faced down rival crews and crooked cops, but never this were shaken to their core. Half wanted out, their faces haunted by the impossible sights they'd witnessed, the monstrous power unleashed. The other half, the more pragmatic or perhaps simply more dangerous, wanted war, a bloody, relentless vengeance for what had been taken. His supply lines, meticulously built over years, were compromised, shredded by the chaos. 3 lieutenants, loyal and capable, were dead, caught in the crossfire of a war they couldn't possibly comprehend. 1 defected, running, screaming into the night, never to be seen again. Another simply left town, a terse fear-laced message the only farewell, and Marco, his right hand, his brother in all but blood, gone. Not killed, not captured, just vanished. A phantom of the storm, leaving a gaping hole in Alessandro's world. But Alessandro had made his choice. There was no undoing it now. He had stepped across a threshold, into a world of shadow and ancient power, and dragged his family with him. He stood before his remaining men a week later, in the cold, unyielding silence of their reinforced warehouse, his shoulder bandaged beneath his shirt, his face pale, but his voice calm, resonating with a new, steel-edged authority. "You're afraid," he said, his gaze sweeping over their anxious faces, the unspoken questions in their eyes. "You should be." He paused, letting the raw truth hang in the air. What happened wasn't a fight. It was a reckoning, a declaration. Our world changed with those first shots, and it will never be the same. His eyes, still reflecting that new, dangerous light, met theirs. "You follow me now. You follow what this family is becoming, not what it was. Not just another crew on the street." Another pause, pregnant with unspoken weight. "We are something more than men now, and that doesn't mean weaker. It means untouchable." They stayed, not because they understood the arcane terrors, not because they suddenly felt brave, but because they'd seen what happens when you cross a Torino allied with monsters. They'd seen the impossible grace of the predators, the sheer, brutal effectiveness of their alliance. They stayed because fear in this new world was a potent form of loyalty. The warehouse still smoldered, a ghost of the violence that had erupted there, faint embers pulsing fitfully beneath layers of ash and ruin, casting long, shifting shadows. Alessandro lay on the makeshift cot in the quiet back room, his shirt bloodied, his shoulder wrapped in gauze, his skin pale beneath the low amber glow of a single bare bulb. The battle was over. The bleeding had stopped. He was alive, but barely, and somewhere deep in the belly of the city's forgotten places, patched up in a medical ghost ward, the family kept off books for moments just like this. The room smelled of iron and antiseptic. Concrete walls. No monitors, no nurses. Just quiet, shadows, and stitches holding him together. Someone had dragged in a cot. Someone else had sent for her. He heard the arrival before he saw Urbear footsteps on cracked tile, silk whispering against stone like a breath drawn in the dark. Valentina entered without announcement, without a word, no veil, no armor, just her, shadow-draped and barefoot, moving with a silent, languid grace, like sin, come home to pray. "You risked everything," she said, her voice a low, resonant hum in the quiet room, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "So did you," he countered, his gaze unwavering. "We're both fools," she conceded, a hint of something resembling a smile playing on her lips, though it never quite reached her eyes. "The dangerous kind," he murmured, the corners of his mouth twisting upward in a dry, painful smirk. She moved to him but didn't touch, a deliberate distance in her posture. Instead, she poured a measure of wine into a chipped, glass-deep, dark, viscous, like liquid night. She set it on the rickety table beside his cot, close enough to reach, but didn't offer it. Didn't stay. "You're part of this now," she said, her voice dropping, taking on a deeper, more resonant quality. "Not just by choice, by blood." He met her eyes, a silent challenge, an unspoken question. Then maybe I need to start learning what that means. Her expression softened infinitesimally, a subtle shift in the predatory intensity of her gaze, but something behind it pulled away, a deep, ancient sadness that seemed to echo in the quiet. You will. A beat of heavy silence, the air thick with unspoken truths and undeniable consequences. And then, instead of a kiss, instead of the intimacy he, in his compromised state, might have craved, she reached out, her cool fingertips brushing his cheek with a feather-light touch, a fleeting connection that left a shiver in its wake. Heal, Alessandro. Then she turned, the shadows in the room folding around her like a closing book, absorbing her into the deeper darkness. He didn't ask her to stay, and she didn't offer. He simply watched her go, the silence in the room now profound, absolute. He was alone, but no longer truly alone. He was part of something new, something terrifying, something born of blood and sacrifice. And the cost was just beginning to reveal itself. Alessandro hated hospitals, even the private kind, dressed in marble and silence, with nurses who never spoke above a whisper and doctors who knew better than to ask how a man ends up with a silver bullet half an inch from his heart. His body was a battlefield, muscles wasted from disuse, the wound a raw, throbbing maw in his chest that no amount of fancy medical care could truly soothe. He refused morphine. Pain was honest, a constant biting reminder he was alive, even if barely, and he'd had enough lives for one lifetime. He spent his days in a fevered haze, the only clear thought a burning question. Where was she? Valentina hadn't come, not since the fire, not since she whispered something into his temple, a promise or a curse. He couldn't recall and vanished into smoke. Lysander brought wine, Gio brought cigars, neither brought her. He dreamt of her most nights, not soft, not sweet. He dreamt of her standing over him, eyes dark and unreadable, as he begged her to do it. Please, he whispered in the dream, voice full of pain and something worse than need. I can't protect you like this. I can't keep up. In the dream, she touched his face, a touch like frost, then fall behind. He would wake then, gasping, the phantom chill of her fingers on his skin, the emptiness of the room, a cold, hard truth. Each tick of the clock was another betrayal. Each shadow on the door, another hope dashed. He was a man dying of thirst in sight of an ocean, and the ocean was her. 3 nights later, on the cusp of dawn, when the hospital was at its most desolate, she came. Unannounced, unapologetic, just walked in as if she belonged there, which she did. Not a savior, but a looming silhouette against the pale light of the hallway. No guards stopped her. They never did. She stood at the foot of his bed, arms crossed, hair loose, wearing black like it meant something different when she did, less a color, more a void. He looked worse, pale, gaunt. Anger kept him tethered to life. You could have killed him, he rasped, his voice raw from disuse and wanting. I should have, she replied, her voice a low, melodic thrum that vibrated through the silent room. But the hunter escaped, and your brother vanished. He grunted, a sound of bitter defeat. So, I'm alive for nothing then, a liability, a broken toy. She didn't respond, her gaze unwavering, chilling. You left me, he accused, the words ragged. After everything, after you brought me into this, you just walked away. You asked me not to bite you, she countered, her eyes like chips of obsidian. Then why do I feel like I died anyway? The question hung in the air, a naked wound. That silenced her. The room fell into a hush so heavy it became sacred, charged with unspoken truths and desperate longing. Do it, he said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper, an order and a plea intertwined. Turn me. Stillness. The only sound was the distant hum of the hospital and the ragged beat of his own heart. I bled for you. I nearly died. I lost men, family. You said I was part of this now, so make it real. Make me one of you. Please, Valentina. I can't go back to being just a man. The last words were filled with a desperate, unfamiliar vulnerability. Her eyes flicked to him, and in them he saw pity, not for himself, not for his pain, but for the profound ignorance of what he was asking. "You don't understand, Alessandro," she said quietly, her voice imbued with ancient weariness. "This isn't power. This isn't control. It's hungering, endless, gnawing emptiness you can never fill. It's silencia solitude, so vast it devours souls. It's centuries of watching everyone you care for turn to dust while you keep feeding, keep existing in immutable horror. You think I don't know what loss feels like?" He challenged, pushing himself higher on the pillows, the pain a distant echo to the torment of his soul. "Not yet. Not the way I do. Your losses, as terrible as they are, still have an end. Mine are eternal, and they stack, one upon another, until you are nothing but a tomb walking." "Then teach me," he rasped, desperate. "Teach me to bear it. Just don't leave me behind." Her voice was sharp now, cutting through his pleas. "Don't beg me for eternity just because you feel weak. Don't ask me to bury your humanity so you can feel invincible. That's not strength, Alessandro. That's cowardice. You think I'm afraid to change?" His jaw clenched, defiance warring with desperation. "I think you're afraid to stay the same, afraid to face a world where you are vulnerable, where you can be hurt, where you can lose. That's what makes you real, Alessandro. That's what makes you you." The silence that followed was violent, tearing at the edges of his sanity. Finally, she stepped closer, her shadow falling over him like a shroud. "I love what you are now," she said, her voice trembling with a raw, unexpected restraint, a tremor not of weakness but of immense controlled power. "Not the guns, not the empire you built, but the man who, despite everything, still knows the difference between justice and vengeance. The man who can still feel a pause, heavy with unspoken truths. If I turn you," she said, softer now, the words falling like flakes of ash, "that part of you dies. That capacity for human anger, for human joy, for human sorrow, it hardens, it twists, it becomes something else entirely. And I lose the only man who's ever truly seen me without fear. The only man who ever dared to love me, not for what I am, but for who he believed I could be, before I had to show him the truth." He looked at her, not like a mob boss, assessing a threat, not like a monster, demanding fealty, just a man, wounded, wanting. His raw, human desire laid bare. "And what if I don't care what I lose?" She reached out, touched his face with a hand cold and eternal, a touch that burned with the truth of her refusal, a kiss made of ash, already settling on his skin. "Then you're not ready. And I refuse to destroy the very thing I cherish." She left before dawn, didn't look back, didn't slam the door, and Alessandro sat in that hospital bed, staring at the space she just vacated, feeling more mortal than he ever had. Not because of pain, not because of the bullet still lodged too close to his heart, but because, for the first time, he knew what it meant to be denied forever, to have the only thing he yearned for withheld, not out of cruelty, but as a final, agonizing act of love. She had given him the gift of his humanity, even as it felt like a death sentence. The cathedral was quiet, not with peace, but with the breathless hush of a place that held its breath. It was a vast, cold maw of ancient stone, every arch and column a silent witness, remembering every fervent prayer whispered into its echoing nave, every desperate sin never confessed. Candles wept streams of molten wax down their spines, like tears for forgotten penances. Rain tapped the stained glass like a relentless metronome, each drop a mournful pulse against the vibrant, holy scenes. Shadows, deep as graves, stretched across ancient effigies and the worn knees of kneeling saints. Alessandro stood near the altar, a solitary figure in the vastness, watching those shadows deepen, absorbing him whole. He hadn't called her. She came anyway, an inevitability. Valentina emerged from the deeper darkness of the side chapels, not walking, but seeming to materialize, like something the church had once tried to bury, now risen. She wore black not mourning, not armor, but silk and shadow, moving with a liquid grace down the aisle, her presence an intrusion and a benediction all at once. He didn't speak, Neither did she. The air between them thrummed, thick with unspoken histories. She simply stopped before him, just out of reach, but close enough for the scent of her, subtle and deep, to reach him. And for a moment, she was utterly still, a statue, carved from sin and silence, waiting. Then, "You asked me once what I would choose," she said, her voice a fragile silk thread unwinding in the sacred space. "If I could have it back." The words barely touched the air, yet they echoed in him, resonating in the hollows of his guilt. "Tonight, I'll tell you." She turned from him then, her movements slow, unhurried, as if performing a private, holy rite. Her fingertips trailed the edge of a polished pew, a phantom touch across generations of devout hands. Her gaze was not on him, but on something unseen, something vast and terrible unfolding behind her eyes. "My memory," she said, and with that, her voice shifted, lower, more resonant, like a chanted liturgy. "My memory was a cathedral gold in blood and silence, the air heavy with incense and secrets. And in the farthest pew, always kneeling, was a little girl I used to be." She looked back at him once, just once, a fleeting glance deep and unfathomable as a moonlit well, and then she disappeared into the story, the past claiming her, present only in its echo. 1473, in Florence. Her voice was a whisper, reverent and haunting. The city smelled of marble dust, of sun, warmed wine, and of lies. I had been born to silk sheets and sharpened smiles, to a name that was a legacy and a burden. I was the daughter of nobility, promised like cattle, gifted like porcelain. She paused, a breath held. My beauty was curated, a commodity. My voice, trained to soothe and to feign obedience. I kept my thoughts silent, hidden behind well-practiced smiles. But my heart, she murmured, the phrase almost a confession to the silent saints, that foolish, defiant thing had wandered. Her fingers ghosted across the polished wood of the pew as if tracing a lost path. He was a stable boy. Not even a man, not truly. Just a boy with calloused hands from reins and shovels and a shy, crooked grin that made my breath catch. He looked at me, not as a possession, but as someone. Someone seen. And he kissed me like I was someone real. Someone worth loving. Her voice softened, a brief, almost painful tenderness. And I let him. Oh, I let him. 3 weeks, she whispered, the words like dust motes dancing in the dim light. Behind chapel walls, where the shadows were long and forgiving, beneath garden vines, entwined in secret, hidden from prying eyes. I gave him everything I wasn't supposed to give. And for those 3 weeks, I thought I was alive. Truly alive. A shiver, almost imperceptible, ran through her. The fragile tenderness vanished, replaced by a cold, hard edge. They hung him from the balcony outside my window. Didn't even clean the stone afterward. The stains. Her voice didn't crack, didn't falter. It was flat, devastating in its lack of emotion. The next day, they married me off to a merchant, a man with gold teeth and dead eyes. Alessandro shifted, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but one that spoke volumes. He moved slowly, closer, as if drawn by an invisible thread, by the sheer, terrible gravity of her confession. His gaze was fixed on her, reverent, unblinking. He didn't pity her, not truly. Pity would have been a judgment, and he was past judgment. He was listening like a man who knew he didn't deserve the truth, but craved it anyway. A desperate thirst for understanding the impossible. That night, she said, her voice dropping to a near, inaudible murmur, as the moon painted judgment across the silken sheets, he kissed my wrist, and with a blade etched in Latin, he slit my throat. Alessandro's breath caught a sharp, choked sound in the profound silence of the cathedral. His knuckles tightened, though he held nothing. He told me I'd be beautiful forever. A pause. The silence stretched, aching. Then, softer. I woke up, entombed in marble. The air was cold, damp. My gown was stiff with blood, dried and crusty against my skin. My mouth was full of hunger and the bitter taste of betrayal. Silence folded around them like a shroud. Only the candles moved, their flames sputtering in the faint, ghostly draft, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with unspoken horrors. For long moments, she merely stood there, breathing, and then she looked at him, truly looked at him, her eyes ancient and raw. "I have spent centuries trying to forget the girl who let herself be owned," she said, her voice a low, fierce incantation, "trying to burn her name out of my bones, trying to become something untouchable, something impervious to wounds. But you," she took a step forward, closing the small distance between them, "you make me feel like I have a pulse again." And Alessandro, quiet still, irrevocably changed by the liturgy of her pain, reached for her. His fingers, slow and deliberate, touched her cheek. He brushed a thumb across the curve of her jaw, his touch feather-light, reverent. She didn't pull away. She leaned into it, infinitesimally, like a parched plant seeking water. "You're not a monster," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur, barely audible over the relentless tap of the rain. "You were made, and unmade," she countered, her eyes searching his, seeking something akin to absolution, or perhaps just recognition. He leaned in then, not rough, not demanding, just there, his breath, warm and human, against her lips, and she let him. The cathedral held its breath, the ancient stones listening. Their kiss wasn't sweet, it wasn't gentle. It was the kind of kiss carved out of history, out of blood and prayer and unforgivable choices, the kind that shouldn't happen, yet felt utterly inevitable, the kind you bleed for and never speak of again. It was silk over fangs, wine over wounds, a communion of two broken things trying to remember how to feel, how to breathe in the same sacred, haunted space. It was two ghosts meeting under a moon that already knew how this ended, but permitted it anyway, just this once. They didn't say another word. When she finally drew back, slipping from his grasp like smoke, she turned and disappeared into the deeper shadows from which she had come. He stayed behind, alone in the vast, cold church, breathing like a man who just touched the edge of a miracle that still burned. The sky over the Torino estate was black glass. No moon, no stars. Just a taste of ash on the wind. Alessandro knew Marco was there before he saw him. The house was too quiet. The air is still. He walked the corridor slowly, hand brushing the mahogany rail like it might whisper an answer. The door to their father's old study was cracked open. That alone was enough. No one opened that door. Not anymore. He stepped inside. The scent of old leather and forgotten victories hung heavy, familiar yet tainted, like a childhood dream turned nightmare. Dust motes danced in the lone shaft of moonlight that had somehow pierced the black glass sky, illuminating the ghosts of shared laughter, whispered secrets, and lessons learned at their father's knee. Every book on the shelves, every scuff on the polished desk, was a testament to a life they had once built together, now crumbling to ash. Marco sat behind the desk, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, half empty. He didn't look up when Alessandro entered, but his shoulders were stiff, his jaw clenched. "I was wondering how long it'd take you," Marco said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. "To find you?" Alessandro closed the door behind him, the click echoing with finality. "Or to admit you're a traitor?" Marco laughed, dry and bitter, a sound that grated in the quiet room. "I was never the traitor," he said, fondly looking up. His eyes, once so like Alessandro's own, were now clouded with resentment and a deep, churning pain. "You were, the second you invited her in. She saved my life. No, she ended it. You just haven't noticed the corpse you're walking around in yet." Marco's laughter scraped like a rusty blade. "Replaced, Alessandro. That's what I am. What we are. The moment you looked at her, truly looked at her, you saw something you thought was better than what we had. Better than me. You threw away everything, all the years, all the promises, all the blood we shed together, for a creature who feeds on what we despise." His voice climbed, raw and desperate. "Remember when we swore we'd always stick together, against everyone? We built this. We ruled this, you and I. And then you brought a stranger into our house, into our lives, into your bed, and suddenly the old ways, the old loyalties, they didn't matter anymore. I'm not a traitor. I'm the last man left who remembers what family meant before you decided it was disposable. Silence stretched between them, taut and dangerous, heavy with the weight of broken history. Marco rose slowly, fingers brushing the gun, holstered at his side but not drawing. You think this ends with her saving you? He asked. You think you can build something new on the bones of our family? She'll bleed you dry, brother. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but one night, when you're weakest, when you finally think she loves you. Alessandro's gaze was fixed on his brother, unlinking. The grief in him was an ancient river, deep and silent, carving its devastating path beneath a surface of glacial calm. He didn't flinch. You sound like a man who's already lost. I sound like a man who remembers what loyalty meant. Loyalty? Alessandro stepped forward, his voice a low, steady murmur, betraying nothing of the maelstrom within. You sold us out. You handed Lysander to the hunter. You signed death warrants in my name, to protect you, to protect our legacy from what she's turning you into. No, to control me. Marco's voice dropped, venomous. You're not strong enough to be feared anymore. You used to command a room, Alessandro. Men trembled in your presence. Now you look at her like a sinner staring at salvation, like a man who wants to be forgiven. A long pause, heavy with accusation. And there's no room for saints in this family. The moment hung, heavy, holy. Alessandro saw not just Marco, but the ghost of the boy who had once shared his bed, his bread, his very name. The choice wasn't made in a rush of anger, but forged in the cold, hard certainty that this was the end of a line, a final, necessary severing. He didn't want to watch Marco bleed out slowly, fueled by bitterness and betrayal. This was a mercy, a ritual sacrifice of what remained of his soul. And then Marco moved, quick. The gun raised, his face contorted in a final, defiant snarl. But Alessandro was faster. His hand already knew its purpose. It wasn't rage that pulled the trigger, but a terrible, sorrowful inevitability. One shot, clean, close, right under the ribs. The gunshot ripped through the oppressive quiet, then swallowed itself, leaving behind a silence so profound, so heavy, it pressed down on Alessandro like a tombstone. The air vibrated with absence, the absence of a life, the absence of a brother, the absence of a choice that might have saved them both. Marco staggered, dropped the gun, dropped the glass, dropped to one knee, a dark stain blossoming on his shirt. He looked up, eyes wide, with something that wasn't fear. It was grief. You were supposed to protect me. Alessandro crouched beside him, ignoring the metallic tang in the air, the warmth of the spreading blood. He held his brother's face in blood-slick hands. I was supposed to love you. Then why? Marco choked, his breath rattling. Because you made me choose. Alessandro's voice was barely a whisper, a sound ripped from the deepest chamber of his soul. It felt less like an act of violence and more like a wound inflicted upon himself. A sealing of his own damnation. He stayed there as Marco bled out, not blinking, not breathing. His grip was firm, a desperate anchor in the ebbing tide of life. He felt the last pulse flutter, then still. And then, only then, did he stand. Valentina waited by the fountain, a dark silhouette against the estate's pale stone. She said nothing as he approached. His shirt was stained, his knuckles were torn from where he'd gripped the mahogany rail, or perhaps from where he'd held onto his brother. There was a look in his eyes she'd never seen before. Something empty. Something damned. It's done, he said, his voice flat, hollow. I know. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering but distant. He didn't beg. Neither did you. He nodded once. The truth of it, brutal and stark, settled over him. Then he looked down at his hands, as if expecting them to start burning. That night, Alessandro didn't sleep. He sat in the chapel alone, the echo of his brother's voice still clinging to the cold stone. He lit a candle, then another. The small flames flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. He whispered something between a prayer and a curse, the words catching in his parched throat. He was right, he murmured, the silence of the chapel amplifying his confession. There's no room for saints. He blew the flame out. Darkness swallowed the room. The sun hadn't risen yet, but Valentina could feel it coming, a slow, inexorable crawl of light threatening to scour the night clean. The air wasn't merely thin tonight. It was pressurized, heavy with the weight of unseen forces, a palpable dread that settled deep in her bones. The shadows, usually her allies, stretched longer than they should have, reaching like skeletal fingers from unseen depths. The city, usually a cacophony of life and vice, now hummed with a quiet that wasn't sleep, but a predatory stillness, a collective holding of breath. Every cobblestone seemed to absorb the tension, every skyscraper a silent sentinel, watching, waiting for the inevitable crack of doom. Erebus was empty, cleared, prepped. The grand, opulent hall, once vibrating with the throb of 1,000 heartbeats and the heady scent of blood and charm, was now a hollowed-out stage for a tragedy it was never built to survive. Valentina stood on the upper balcony, a ghost in her own domain, looking down at the very floor where she had first laid eyes on Alessandro Torino, where their chaotic, undeniable story began. Now, only silence reigned, thick and suffocating, and the metallic tang of a hunter's trap, coiling like a venomous serpent in the air. Lysander appeared beside her, a phantom made flesh, his silence absolute. But his aura, usually a comforting anchor, was different now, taut as a drawn bowstring, radiating a strained awareness that mirrored her own. "He's here," he murmured, his voice a low vibration in the echoing void. "I know," Valentina replied, her gaze still fixed on the empty floor below, the stage set for their undoing. "He used the chaos, the infighting, the war. He waited. They always wait," Lysander stated, the ancient wisdom a bleak comfort. "And he's not alone." Albeit a silence that screamed of unseen forces converging. "Neither are we," she said, but the words tasted like ash. Even as they left her lips, she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the core that this wasn't a war with shifting tides. This was a reckoning, a final, merciless act. Downstairs, Alessandro moved through the empty corridors of Erebus, like a man walking through a dream that had begun to rot from the inside out. He was armed, yes, but every step was a deliberate effort, his ragged breathing echoing in the vast silence. He was bleeding from a wound at his side, his face already bruised, one eye swelling shut, but his gaze remained sharp, defiant. He knew they were coming. He just didn't know where. Then the trap unfolded, not with a sudden crash, but like a grotesque symphony in slow motion, each note a calculated slice of dread. A whisper of displaced air, a glint of silver from the highest rafters. The hunter struck with inhuman speed, a silver-tipped arrow, a lethal streak of light. It sliced through the upper level, an audible thwack that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the city. It pinned Lysander not just through the shoulder, but deep into the ornate wall behind him, a grotesque crucifixion. He didn't scream. He never did. But a shudder ripped through his frame, his jaw clenching, eyes momentarily dilating with internal agony before settling back into their familiar, stoic resignation. The city, it seemed, caught its breath. Valentina spun, a blur of righteous fury, her eyes already black wells of ancient power, fangs flashing, her cloak flaring like monstrous wings. From the deepest shadows, the hunter stepped into the eerie half-light, not cloaked, not armored, just dressed in unassuming white, stark and pristine and terrifyingly holy. Unassuming, deadly. "One of you dies tonight." Their voice, utterly devoid of emotion, resonated through the club. "I'll leave the choice to her." Alessandro staggered into full view, his earlier wound now a crimson slash across his side, one eye already a swollen, purpling ruin. He locked eyes with Valentina, a fierce, protective fire burning in his good one. "Don't even think about it," he growled, his voice raw but firm. There was no plea, no fear for himself, only a deep, resonant understanding of the terrible choice she faced. "Run! Save your people." She didn't move, frozen in the awful tableau. "I'm not leaving you." "Then you're no better than him," he countered, nodding toward the hunter, his voice edged with a strange, fierce pride. making martyrs out of monsters. Lysander's voice cut through the lingering echoes of the arrow strike from behind her, low and firm, strained with pain. Valentina. She turned to him, anguish warring with defiance. I won't. You will. His voice cracked then, a rare raw sound that spoke of the immense personal cost of his words. He's not the Covenant. She shook her head, fury trembling at the edge of her lips, a desperate denial. He is. No, Lysander insisted, his gaze intense, pinning her. We are. Valentina looked at Alessandro bleeding, defiant, a beacon of reckless humanity. Then, at her second in command, pinned but proud, his silence was a heavy weight on her soul. Then past them both to the flickering edge of dawn, a faint smear of bruised purple and gray, rising behind the stained glass of Erebus, promising a new, unforgiving day. The decision was a scar carved into her immortality, a rending of her very essence. Her face, usually a mask of control, was a canvas of quiet devastation. She moved, not toward the hunter, not toward Alessandro, but toward the shadows behind the throne of Erebus where her people waited, trembling, loyal, and afraid. With movements precise and ritualistic, she opened a passage beneath the club, whispering the ancient words only Lysander knew, words etched into the fabric of their long, secret history. And with a single wrenching act of will, she sent the coven into the dark, safe, alive, and utterly, impossibly severed from her. The hunter raised the blade, a wicked glint of silver in the gloom. Alessandro charged, a roar torn from his raw throat, a desperate, valiant act. But Valentina got there first. Steel met fang in a sickening, visceral clash. Holy water, sprayed from the hunter's hand, burned her skin like acid, searing blisters onto her arms and face. But she didn't stop, driven by a primal need, by a love that transcended logic and blood. Not until the hunter fell, a crumpled heap of white, did their deadly mission end. Not until the room was silent again, the city's held breath finally exhaled. Alessandro collapsed, not from injury, but from the unbearable weight of it all, the profound, inevitable loss that settled over them. She knelt beside him, burnt and shaking, her mouth stained with the pain of victory. Why? He whispered, his voice hoarse, his gaze searching hers. Because I don't get to choose both, she murmured, her voice equally raw, her eyes soft but hollowed out by the sacrifice. She touched his face, her blistered fingers tracing the lines of his exhaustion and pain. And because if I lost you now, I wouldn't forgive myself. You sent them away. A statement, not a question. I had to. You chose me. No, she said, her voice a ghost of a whisper. Her gaze was distant, seeing not just him, but the boundless expanse of her empty future. I chose to lose a little less. Lysander survived, barely, pulling himself from the wall, his shoulder a ruin. Valentina's arms were blistered, her voice hoarse from the holy water's burn. The coven was safe deep underground, a future secured at an unbearable cost. But she'd left part of herself behind, a piece of her soul carved away with the very act of saving them. And Alessandro? He lay in her bed that night, too weak to rise, cradled by her, not yet turned, not yet damned, but closer than ever to the precipice. And for the first time in her long, long life, stripped bare of all her defenses, Valentina wept, a quiet, holy devastation. Longing and pride burned at the edges of her grief, a constant ache, for they had saved each other, only to lose everything. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. The city felt like it was grieving soaked in sin and silver skies, each drop tapping a dirge on the window panes. Alessandro lay in her bed, not the spare room, not the clinic, her bed. The sheets were soaked in sweat and fever, clinging to his cooling skin. His body, once a testament to vibrant life, had gone waxy, a pale imitation of flesh, growing colder with each gasping second. Each breath rasped, a sound like dry autumn leaves scraping against broken glass, shallow and desperate. The hunter's blade had cut deep, blessed metal, holy water, intent. And now, his body was betraying him by the hour, his very cells turning against the life force that had once defined him. His thoughts, once sharp and focused, had begun to fray at the edges, dissolving like old lace. Memories flickered, dissolving into abstract shapes, names becoming mere whispers on the wind. He tried to grasp at the image of a sun-drenched street, a warm laugh, but it was like sand slipping through his fingers. The light in his eyes, once a vivid, intelligent spark, was receding, replaced by a dull, unfocused glaze. It wasn't pain, not truly. It was an insidious emptiness, a sense of himself being hollowed out molecule by molecule. A cold, alien hunger, not for food, but for something undefinable, began to stir deep within his gut, a primal yearning for an unknown sustenance pulling him towards a new, terrifying abyss. Valentina stood at the window, a statue carved from ancient sorrow, barefoot, unmoving. Wrapped in silk the color of dried roses, the fabric shimmered like captured regret in the dim, rain-filtered light. She hadn't spoken in hours. She didn't need to. The room was heavy with choices already made, centuries of them echoing in the silent space between them. Her face, usually a mask of serene neutrality, held a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a fleeting shadow of the profound grief that was her constant companion. This wasn't a moment of decision, but a solemn acceptance of an old, familiar tragedy. "I thought I understood what it meant to die," Alessandro rasped, his voice a dying ember. The words were difficult, each one a monumental effort battling against the encroaching silence. Valentina turned her head slightly, just enough to see him, her dark eyes, pools of untold ages, fixed upon his fading form. Not enough to move, not yet. Her stillness was a testament to a patience born of eternity, but beneath it, a current of profound reluctance swirled. "But it's not pain, is it?" he continued, a thin, reedy sound that barely disturbed the heavy air. "It's being forgotten. It's knowing the world keeps spinning without you. That your name, your face, your very existence will simply cease to be. To be erased." Her voice was soft, laced with the dust of forgotten empires, a sound that could cradle a secret or shatter a soul. "And you still want to stay?" There was no judgment in her tone, only an infinite weariness. She had seen this play out countless times before. "I want to matter. Just one last time. Before the curtain falls completely." "You already do. You always have." "Then let me keep mattering," he pleaded, a last desperate plea against the encroaching void. She moved to him then, slowly, deliberately, a shadow gliding over old stone, not with haste or passion, but with the measured solemnity of a priest approaching an altar for a final, mournful rite. Every gentle step brought her closer to the edge of his fading humanity. She sat on the edge of the bed, the silk sighing around her. Her fingers, delicate as candle smoke, cold and ethereal, trailed across his forehead, pressing lightly against his clammy skin. She felt the slow, faltering beat of his pulse beneath her touch, a drumbeat fading into silence. "You're asking me for eternity," she whispered, the words tinged with a sorrow so deep it was almost an apology. "I'm asking not to be erased, to not become nothing." His eyes, dimming but still holding a desperate light, searched hers for something, anything, beyond the ancient despair. "You will lose your name, your voice, the beat of your heart." Each word was a tolling bell, marking the loss of a piece of his essence. "All that makes you, you. Then give me yours." It was a surrender, a desperate bargain, a plea for a different kind of ending, even if it was the beginning of something far more terrible. She looked at him then, truly looked, and what he saw wasn't softness. It wasn't mercy in the gentle sense. It was the unyielding gaze of a woman made of midnight, offering a kiss that would outlast the sun and burn away all memory of warmth. Her eyes were not alight with passion, but with the cold, enduring light of a distant star. "This isn't love, Alessandro," she stated, her voice devoid of all warmth, a statement of fact, not a warning. It was the solemn declaration of a funeral officiant. "I know. This is loneliness with teeth." A pause, heavy with the weight of centuries of solitude and the quiet horror of what was to come. Then bite me with them. She leaned in. No ceremony. No oath. No caress. Just the brush of her lips against his throat, as cold as marble. He felt the stuttering rhythm of his pulse beneath her mouth, a dying hymn, and then fangs. A sharp, searing pain bloomed, an exquisite torture that ripped through the last vestiges of his human consciousness. Then, like a sudden, blinding flash, ecstasy followed, not of pleasure, but of a profound, shattering release. It was the soundless shattering of glass, the complete obliteration of everything he had been, then nothing, an absolute, total void. The world faded to black, the very concept of self-dissolving like smoke. It was cold, so profoundly cold, and utterly horrifyingly irreversible. When he woke, the city was quiet. Not because it was asleep, but because, for the first time, to him, it was listening. A profound, absolute silence that stretched out, hitting him like a scream no one else could hear. His chest didn't rise, his heart didn't beat, no breath stirred in his lungs, but the world around him pulsed sharp, alive with a terrifying clarity, like he'd never truly lived until now. Every scent, every distant whisper of the rain, every faint tremor of the earth beneath the city was now amplified, alien, overwhelming. He was attuned to the night in a way that screamed of an unnatural existence. Valentina sat across from him, a dark silhouette against the muted light from the window. A goblet of blood, the color of claret, rested in one hand. Her eyes were unreadable, holding secrets he could never hope to unravel. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice an echo in the vast silence. He looked down at his hands, pale, smooth, stronger, but alien. He raised a hand to his face, feeling the cool, unyielding skin. His own body, yet utterly transformed. "Empty," he said, the word a hollow resonance in his new, soundless chest. And then, a tremor, a deep, pervasive ache from within his core. And starving. She nodded once, a gesture that contained generations of weary understanding. "Welcome to forever. Will it always feel like this?" The hunger was already there just behind his ribs, a gnawing, eager beast, a constant companion that would define his new existence, a thirst for something beyond anything he had ever known. "Worse," she said, her expression unchanging. He stood, slowly. His movements were fluid, effortless, utterly unlike the strained weakness of moments before. This new strength felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He moved toward her, drawn by an instinct as old as time itself. She didn't flinch, didn't stir, but her eyes, they held something new. Not fear, not surprise, but a profound, ancient distance. A chasm had opened between them that would never close. "You said this wasn't love," he murmured, the words feeling foreign on his new tongue. "It wasn't. But you still did it." She set the goblet down, the sound barely a whisper, rose from the chair like dusk unfolding, a slow, deliberate unveiling of dark elegance. "Because mercy," she said, her voice flat, "is the cruelest thing I have left to give." And then she walked past him, bare feet, black silk trailing like a shadow, unbothered, like she hadn't just rewritten his eternity, condemned him to a living death that would stretch beyond the stars. He was left alone in the profound, echoing silence of his new, immortal night. 6 months. That's how long it took to build the facility. A clean, silent tower buried beneath the city, disguised in marble and whispers. From Alessandro's vantage, it was a triumph of problem solving, a perfectly calibrated engine of resource acquisition, a mausoleum of compassion. Gio had dryly noted, his voice a low, gravelly hum through Alessandro's earpiece, a masterpiece of cruelty dressed as industrial progress. Every drip accounted for, every heart still beating for the sole purpose of its cessation. Indeed, every detail was precise, every surface is sterilized. Donors, meticulously selected from a vast, unseen database, were processed like fine wine vintages, fed the right diet, kept just healthy enough, their lives modulated with chilling exactitude to ensure the peak quality of the crimson harvest. No more risks. No more messy feedings in alleys or back rooms. No more impulsive hunts leaving telltale trails of horror. Just efficiency. Perfect, chilling efficiency. Alessandro stood above it all, now behind bulletproof glass, a cloaked silhouette against the sterile glow, watching the red flow in gentle, clinical waves. A perpetual river of life, carefully siphoned, neatly contained. The primal hunger never stopped, a dull ache beneath his ribs, but it was managed, like everything else. And in this management, in this cold, flawless control, every success felt like a loss. He moved through his burgeoning empire like a shadow wearing a crown, his presence a pressure more than a physical form. The criminal families, once a tangle of brutal loyalties and petty feuds, fell in line with shocking speed. Those who didn't simply, utterly disappeared, leaving only a lingering chill in the air where their power had been. The vampires who remained served him with quiet obedience, their ancient pride subsumed by fear and a new, terrible order. Not because they loved him. Affection was a luxury long since bled from this new world. No, they served him because Valentina had told them to. Before she left, she hadn't said goodbye. Not really. Just slipped away one night. No ceremony, no final kiss to mark the passing of an era. Just a note folded on silk, its elegant script, a stark incision on the silence. You were always meant to wear the crown. I was just here to teach you what it costs. He wore black now. Always. Not in mourning, for what was there to mourn when all had been achieved? Not in homage, for homage implied a weakness of spirit. He wore it because it suited the throne he sat on. After all, it was the color of the void she had left behind. Erebus had been rebuilt taller, darker, colder, more church than club. The vibrant pulse of the old world was gone, replaced by a cavernous silence. The music was gone. Only silence remained. Silence and the echo of a voice he still heard when the night was too still, a phantom whisper of silk and sin. Lysander stayed, a fixture in the periphery, but only in the shadows. A ghost of loyalty. A reminder. She watches, he'd said once, his eyes ancient and weary. Where? Alessandro had asked, a flicker of something he didn't recognize stirring within him. Everywhere. Alessandro never asked again. He didn't want to know if that was true or just something Lysander told himself to keep the queen alive in a world that had no room for her. One night, Alessandro returned to the upper chamber of Erebus, the room where she first walked in, all silk and shadow, like sin draped in perfume. He sat alone now, the vast space swallowing him whole. He lit a cigarette, the flare briefly illuminating the hard planes of his face, the sharpness of his gaze, watched the smoke curl toward the vast, empty chandelier. He poured himself a glass of the richest donor vintage, the blood a deep, inviting ruby in the crystal. He brought it to his lips and tasted nothing. The perfect purity, the careful calibration, it was meaningless. Be careful what you wish for, he murmured, the words hollow in the echoing space. Outside, the city pulsed. It didn't scream anymore. It bowed. It breathed in quiet, subjugated rhythms. The glass stayed untouched beside him as he turned his eyes to the stained glass that overlooked the city, a new addition to Erebus. It showed a crowned figure, fangs, thorns, fire at their feet. He'd commissioned it himself, a monument to his reign. And still he couldn't look at it for too long. He was king now, but the woman who taught him how to wear the crown, she was gone. And all he had left was an emptiness that even the perfect reign, the perfect control couldn't fill, and a hunger not for blood, no, never for blood, for that he had in abundance. But for something even she couldn't give him. In the vast, cold stillness of his throne room, alone with the untouchable crown, he understood what the true cost was. He bled everything to wear it, Alessandro's voice a phantom whisper now, and he won nothing at all. That's the end of this tale. But in the world of the supernatural, there's always another shadow waiting. Thank you for staying with me through every twist, turn, and heartbeat. If you enjoyed the ride, there's more waiting for you. Take a look at the other audiobooks on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more magic, monsters, and stories that go bump in the night. Until next time, stay curious and Braven, never stop listening.